10:01, and I call to order the May meeting of the Best Practices in Student Transition Subcommittee of the Oregon Education Investment Board. Welcome to all of you who are listening and to those who are at the table. Seth, you want to do roll call?
Yvonne Curtis.
Here.
Mark Mulvihill.
Present.
David Reeves.
Here.
Lynn Saxton. Kay Turan. Kim Williams.
Here. Okay, and it does look like Lynn and Kay are expected to be in person, so hopefully they'll be joining us.
Lynn will be on the phone.
Oh, on the
I think
phone?
I saw Kay cannot be with us.
Oh, okay, all right, sounds great. So I'm looking for a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded, anybody opposed? Okay, we'll move forward with this agenda. Approval of the minutes from April 8th, looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second? Awesome. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded, anybody opposed? Anything, discussion?
We made one small edit and added the word apprende on page 3. Chair Curtis noted that that was part of the comment, so we added that in, and that's in the official document that you have here.
So I'll just mention the reason I thought it was important to make sure it was included is we have in our set of recommendations, we're looking at a recommendation for Easy CBM Spanish measures, and they are interim assessments, and the Apprenda would be like a smarter balance, kind of summative assessment. So even though ODE was moving forward on that one, we still feel there's another part missing in terms of needing some Spanish measures. So, all right, so anybody, we'll go ahead, everybody in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye, all right. We'll move forward. So we're going to start with the 2-minute updates from the Early Learning Council. Kim, are you going to do the Early Learning Council one today?
I'm going to give it my best shot. We didn't get any information.
Okay.
And so I know that we did a conference call last month, and on that we approved the literacy grants. I'm ashamed to say I don't know how many we approved.
Okay, that sounds okay.
But we did move forward with approval.
Okay.
I think there were some that we
Probably posted. Yes. All right, great.
that was
Anything else?
Those are public at the meeting next week.
No, the next week's are for the kindergarten and innovation
Okay.
grants. The last month's early literacy grants have already been posted, and the ordinance notices have been out. So I'm sorry I don't have that.
That's okay. Sometimes there's more information for these updates than other times, and that's fine.
I might mention that we're awfully excited to be hosting the Early Learning Council and the State Board in Pendleton next week.
Oh, very good.
It's been the definition of herding cats. Everybody has their personal assistant that has a schedule. What we finally haven't worked out, but we're really excited to be a 2.5-day event in Pendleton. Early Learning Council, State Board, lots of visitations, presentations. We're thrilled to host.
Great, should be fun. All right, thank you. David, how about from the Higher Education Coordinating Commission?
We reviewed and approved 2 major reports. One is the financial aid work group proposal, which is being forwarded to the OEIB. It's been approved by the HEC to forward to the OEIB. So we'll obviously talk about that more on the OEIB, but just a few highlights of that. It's need-based. I mean, there was some debate about need-based versus merit-based, and the committee and the commission both saw the necessity of making it really going to the students that need it the most. There's also an emphasis on improving access to ethnic and racial minorities and making that a real emphasis. The Opportunity Grant, emphasis on the first 2 years of the Opportunity Grant should be more open and tilted towards the access side, but the following 2 years or subsequent years should be based a lot on benchmarks of how that student is achieving and progressing. So with the emphasis on access for everybody the first 2 years, but then following that, there's going to be a little bit tighter requirements for meeting benchmarks. So those are kind of the highlights of that. Also calling, of course, for more funding for it, if we're going to do anything meaningful with it. The other report was the credit for prior learning report. Maybe we've seen a draft of that on the OEIB, I believe so, I'm not sure. But that was approved. I think it's some good recommendations in it. It seemed like it was a pretty broad-based report, got a lot of input, calls for faculty involvement, and especially in the approval of what will be counted and what not, but also calling for statewide standards too, and some consistency throughout the state. So I think it's actually a good report. And finally, on the Funding and Achievement Subcommittee, looking at capital requests from the universities, which, the state of the institutions and their buildings in Oregon is a big area to deal with. So looking at capital requests, and we're going to continue looking on ideas for the budget for higher ed, and possibly strategic funding or other initiatives like that in the budget.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move to 5.0 on our agenda, which is COSA and the superintendent report on transforming learning through digital conversion. Craig, you slipped in, I didn't see you there. Good. Craig Hawkins and Boyd Kaiser are both going to present today. And thank you for, they have submitted to us a one-page barriers and solutions, as well as the full strategic plan.
These are marked 5.0.
Great, good morning.
Good morning.
So Rob Hess may be joining us, he's running a little bit late, so, you
Sure.
know, Rob will kind of pop in at some point
Okay.
potentially. Craig Hawkins, Executive Director of COSA,
Boyd Kaiser, Superintendent, North Marion School District.
and we really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you this morning. And, you know, but COSA and OASE, our superintendent's organizations, had a number of work groups going this year on policy level pieces. You've heard from a couple. One is the early learning full day K work group, and they had a set of recommendations that they shared. Another is the reimagining grades 9 to 14 group, and they shared with you earlier in the year. This was a work group that we called e-learning and technology. It really became much bigger than that, and Boyd is going to talk about that a little bit, but I wanted to point you to, we're going to primarily focus on the one-page barriers and outcomes, or barriers and solutions document, but I wanted to point you to the second page of the document, the larger document, that just give you a sense of who was on the work group. Now, from your version, it's since been updated, these are continue to be draft as we work through things with the committee, but one glaring omission that I wanted to point out, Yvonne Curtis has been a very big part of this work group, and she's not there, which is, if you could pick somebody to miss, that was probably the worst possible person.
She's a Will Rogers committee, she never found one she didn't like.
But you can
Get
also,
stuff done.
you can see that in addition to superintendents, we had a number of other district and school administrators. Really great partnership from Intel and Apple, et cetera. And so we feel good about the progress that we've made as a group so far.
Perfect timing.
Rob Hess
Rob
is doing
Hess,
this. Thank you.
Superintendent of Lebanon Community Schools. And so what I'm going to do is turn it over to Boyd, let him talk about sort of the big picture, and then together we're going to just walk through some of the recommendations that we have.
You know, we think the case for transforming Oregon schools is pretty self-evident. We know that schools at their very basic nature is about getting students to know and understand their world. You think about how we come as adults to know and understand our world today, how we do it as a society. It's been completely transformed over the last 10 years. Technology is that transformative tool, and yet when you look in Oregon schools, we haven't transformed yet. There are school children today at school who will not touch technology, and yet we know we've had all these initiatives, the early learning initiative, the transition initiative, our 40-40-20 goals. They will be useless if we're preparing our kids for their past and not their future. So when are we as a state really going to get serious about powering up about getting our schools prepared to deliver 21st century education. That's what this subcommittee is about, and it's a daunting task. When we started to delve into it, it got really big really fast. And one of the things we're nervous about is this going to be a part-time group that really leads the state forward into this big area? We've seen many states start the process of developing a comprehensive strategic plan for moving their states forward. And that has required professionals who have full-time commitment to the process. And if Oregon really wants to get serious about it and do a good job, we think that that kind of commitment needs to happen. But in lieu of that, we have started to lay out a game plan that you see in this document, and I will say this is a draft. We feel like there's a lot of good work that can happen over this summer when we get past the school year and have some time to really delve into it a little bit deeper, but it's got some good initial plans. The first thing that it talks about is connectivity. We know that statewide the governor has been working on a connectivity plan for public sector. We know that includes Oregon schools, but we also know that if we're going to close the achievement gap, the connectivity talks about our students at home, because learning is going to happen outside of the school walls. So one of the things that we need to address is not just connectivity to our schools, but connectivity to our school children wherever they're at, whenever. And so that's a big push with this initiative. The other piece is not just connectivity to the school, but once that broadband reaches the school building, can it get out to the individual sites? If you've been a building administrator, you know those wireless networks that were supposed to solve all the problems are not foolproof. And the more devices that hit our wireless networks, the more difficult and challenging the connectivity is. So how do we master that conundrum that faces schools today? And some of us hit the lottery, and we've got great technology directors who can solve those problems. Some haven't hit the lottery yet, and we're struggling on how to do that. So what's the uniform plan for schools to be able to make sure that all kids have connectivity during the school day? So those are just a couple of pieces around connectivity, and you can see that's barrier number one. And we talked about some solutions. Part of that's an inventory of what currently exists out there. Part of that is about creating partnerships. I know in our local community, we're looking at local service providers to go out and provide low to no cost internet connections to our school children of poverty. How do we do that statewide? So the second one is around inconsistent funding. Some school districts have local options and they're able to put funds into this. But if you look at your operating budget on an annual basis, you do not have the money available to really buy the electronic devices, the instructional materials, the individual devices that are going to be sent home to kids, one-on-one initiatives. Some schools, again, if you're a lottery winner, you go to a school that's got it. Other schools, you don't have access to it, so we want to break that down. Rob, you want to pick up on that textbook one? I know that you worked with that one.
Yeah, I think one of the what we like about this document is we know that Nancy's the barrier buster, and so we've listed these as barriers that need to be busted in order for us to get to that the investment we need for technology. And in addition to the hardware connectivity issues to improve, we also need to look at there's really three areas. There's the area of connectivity, then there's the area of devices, and then there's the area of the instructional materials. And that is a huge piece, and it's kind of like the wild, wild west out there when it comes to what works, what doesn't work, how do we know it works, and it's extremely rapidly moving field. We spent a lot of time researching what other states have done, and there's a lot of research out there. But we know that the 7-year-old textbook adoption cycle is like, it's a few decades, past its time. And then when districts like put off adoptions because of budgets, and then kids have 14-year-old textbooks with 9/11 not even in them. I mean, these are the kind of things that are out there right now. And with the amount of time pressure that teachers have towards developing curriculum, at a lot of levels, they won't teach social studies or science at elementary level because they're so focused on Common Core state standards, and I mean there's just so many things that are getting in the way of materials instruction. So there needs to be a place that school leaders and boards can go to kind of, be able to have vetted things that work. And I know a lot of districts, we did a survey statewide, and a lot of districts have tried a lot of different things. So there are some best practices out there, but those best practices need to be studied and scaled.
And I would say this is another place that the state investment is fairly low. We have a single individual responsible for that textbook adoption, which is an old archaic term process. If we really look at how do we gather, vet, analyze, distribute instructional materials at a low to no cost to individual districts, we have the capability to do that right now. I just had a vendor come into our district to offer us a new English language arts K through 12. We're a small school district, 2,000 kids, $200,000 to do that. Now, there are great materials out there at significantly less cost that would ensure greater access to the standards for our kids. How do we make sure all of Oregon's kids get access to high quality, low cost instructional materials? And who's going to go out there and build the repository and vet the material?
It doesn't seem like there's any one, go ahead, Mark, sorry.
I just asked our chair, she's okay if we interact.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
we have time.
You know, I love that you put the textbook adoption in this. I thought that was really slick. And you look at right now at the Common Core, and you look at like Engage New York, and what's available. I just wonder when, where, and how we are going to make that leap between abandoning textbooks. And I'm wondering I was just thinking about this, but what if we were to look at how much each district spends right now in their textbook adoption for like language arts? Look at what that total is across the state, just as a guesstimate.
Yeah.
Then look at what that investment would be for iPads or Chromebooks if you're moving toward Engage New York. And even include, obviously, the professional development piece that you're going to get to in a minute is the key thing. But I'm just curious, when you really think of the archaic, I'm allowed to term it 7-year adoption, which is crazy, think of social studies books. And then you look at what has been done already with the Common Core, like the work, there's a lot of money spent on that. That's a good product. Do we have internally some of the money there as is? I just want, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If we looked at it differently?
I think it's a good point. I think it's the kind of conversation that we're hoping to spur, the kind of thinking that we're hoping to spur here and bring us all to the table. But let me share one creative thing that we're attempting to do that we think it has some real potential. And we're the second state that's attempting to do this through their administrator association. So next week, Apple and COSA are together bringing more than 50 teachers from around the state together to create a new site called COSA on iTunes U. It could be called anything. The name isn't important. What's important is that we're developing courses and resource materials, middle school and high school, in the 4 main areas: math, science, English, language arts, and social studies. They'll be aligned to the Common Core. There'll be a really good set of resources for teachers to use for free. That'll be housed on the site, and then we'll continue to build from there. It's going to be a really amazing couple of days. I think it's fair to say that the teachers in Texas, which is a previous state to do this, who did this work together, to a person said it's the best professional learning experience they've ever had as they developed to bring in really great high school math teachers, come together and build courses and resources for others to use. It's really strong. And so, along with Apple, we're going to pull that off and we're going to get it started. It's just one of the ways. I think we have to become a little bit creative together to figure out a pathway for us to be able to move in a digital direction and also maintain a truly current set of resources and materials for teachers and students to access.
We talked about incubation labs and how do we fund and finance those to get the kind of innovation happening. So this is a perfect example of doing that, and how can we support those across the state. But I think there also needs to be a coordinated effort, and one of the things that we've talked about is putting together a playbook, if you would, that says, how do I, as a building administrator or a superintendent, put together the pieces of this puzzle? We are not digital natives, we are immigrants. The people who are in the position of administering the buildings are the furthest away, really, in age from the technology. So how do we turn ourselves into the most proficient users so we make the best decisions? So some of that is having resources at our hand that says, these are the steps you need to take in order to transform your district. Some of it are talking about what will schools look like and giving a model that says this kind of professional development, these kind of tools, this kind of connectivity, and making that available for people as a resource. But who puts that together? Is that, again, one of these incubation labs? Is it a funding grant from OEIB? Where does that really come from, and when do we have the time and effort and energy to put those things together? So I think that those are some of the strategies that we've talked about. Ongoing professional development, we've got to get with TSPC and we've got to talk about, do you have a learning component around technology for the people who are coming into our field? I am amazed when I interview those people at my school for the new jobs and I talk about technology, how little some of them have. Now, in their own life, very, very conversant with it, but when I talk about instructional technology and their ability to use it in the classroom, kind of limited. So where do we do that? And then how do we train each other? What's the professional development for administrators? And our teachers are going to be in the field for a long time, right? We've got that age group of 30 to 50. That is the main group of people who deliver education. How are we training them? And what is that really important tool? Because they're in that transition mode as well. So
So
that's
part of our problem with the training, when we say, instructional technology, training, whatnot, we tend to do one size fits all. But it really is different for baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials. And maybe that's something we ought to look at a little more deliberately is, it has to be around generation on the training aspect. I mean, you look at a 30-year teacher, unless they're a techie person that likes it, on Facebook all the time, they're not going to be using it much. But you look at a rookie coming out, they have all that exposure, they know nothing but, they've never used a pencil, but they're not necessarily instructionally sound. And it's just, just crossed my mind, just look at professional development, we tend to say let's do a training and we expect all these different age groups to come in and interest levels and integrate technology.
I'm always amazed how much of our training around technology is in a very traditional manner.
Yeah.
And how come we're not using technology to deliver that in a very flexible, personalized way?
Right now, we're doing a one-to-one, and the principal says he was ready for the collaboration between students and the collaboration between teachers, but what he didn't anticipate was the collaboration between students and teachers. And what they're finding as they go through the year where teachers felt like they need to know how to use the app, show the kids how to do the task, what they're slowly changing to do is design the task and the educational experience, and finding that they're kind of throwing it out for the kids. Because when they did that in the beginning and were more prescriptive, the kids came back the next day and said, well, we know you want us to do this with this app, but we found a better one. And then they said, should we show you how to do it? And the teachers are saying, better yet, show one another. The teachers are saying, I don't really need to know how to use the app. I need the kids to be able to produce. So they're finding that while there was this anticipation and this anxiety around their learning curve and getting started, that has dropped off significantly over the year because they've realized that they get to stay in the role of the expert designer of the instructional strategy and intervention and experience that the kids experience. They don't have to master the apps. The other thing we're finding from the research is it says that if we just even wait a few years, which we don't want to wait, but knowing that these changes are coming, in 3 years they're saying you're going to have a significant number of teachers that are native technology users. So that's going to change the nature of what you're doing in the buildings anyway, and within 5 years there'll be very few of those left who will not feel like they have any ability to navigate. Additionally, what I'm also hearing is that kids will, within 5 years, be coming with multiple devices anyway. So what we're going to have to solve is the bring your own device. So the aha that happened to us was, we're still planning for the adults. We still look at this from what do the adults need rather than what the kids need if we keep going at it in a traditional way.
And I so much appreciate those comments because from the very beginning, the committee has said this is really not about substituting a computer for a textbook. It's about transforming learning, which is fundamentally different. How do we investigate? How do we collaborate? How do we communicate? How do we create? In the real world, those things are done because the transformative power of technology has allowed it to happen in a very different way. But our kids are still stuck in a very traditional manner. So we are not preparing them for their future. So allowing them to engage in that kind of learning, Yvonne, that you just talked about, where they're doing the investigation, they're doing the learning, they're learning how to learn, is exactly the role that they need. And that's why we think this is so imperative. We feel like we're behind the game. You know,
We are as a state, and unfortunately, it's an equity issue. And when we just let everyone do their own thing, what happens is we have achievement gaps getting larger and larger, and they fall along poverty lines. And because of that, the learning and all the research that we've done, the learning really jumps when kids take devices home, when they own the device. Not when they're just handed it at school, but when they own it. And that's when it just, you get to that next level. And most districts can't afford the type of devices they need or the training that teachers need to get to that one-to-one level. So we keep like, well, let's trade out some textbook money, let's do this, let's do that, let's pass a bond, and then we create winners and losers. And you know, if we're serious about equity, this is something that has to be on the table.
You know, Craig, I just got to think this is a perfect opportunity to have kids on one of the task forces.
Good idea. Really good idea.
You know,
Like
like a
that.
couple different age group kids on that group would be really a good one.
Great.
Okay, so it all comes down to money. Looking at
So this is Lynn Saxton, and I just want to let you know I've joined the call. I apologize for being late, and will follow your guidance for when you want the ELC report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so when you look at the 6 barriers, when you think of a state investment versus a local investment where Rob was going, is there a recommendation at this point on what would be a state investment along those? Which one of those would be the priority for state investment? Is it number 1? Is that I mean,
It's going to be the biggest roadblock that we're going to have to overcome is connectivity, and it will be the one that creates the largest inequity that Rob talked about if we don't have it.
It kind of has to start there, because without it, the rest of it, you know, just isn't as functional as it ought to be.
it's kind of the foundation, it's kind of the facilities, it's kind of the all-day kindergarten
Yeah.
conversation.
But I think almost simultaneously is people are ready to spend money on instructional materials right now. So our intermediate school, grades 3 through 5, one-to-one devices. Our middle school, grades 6 through 8, one-to-one devices. But now can I purchase e-materials? What materials do I use? Who's going to vet them? Who's going to approve them? How am I going to make sure they're really getting kids to standards? That's a really tough process.
And can we negotiate
Yeah.
statewide pricing?
Yeah.
That's right.
Because we did some experimenting last year where instead of buying, we let some people get some social studies, traditional textbooks, which are getting better and better, right? I mean, there's good materials out there. And then other people got some devices. Well, there's better instruction happening with the people that bought the textbooks. And the reason why is the people that got the devices didn't get enough training to be able to create their own materials. And teachers, there's a difference between a teacher who can create their own materials, like the people that are coming to this COSA thing, and people who are just, can deliver things that they already have. They don't have the time to create their own materials. So to me, a key way that needs to happen is number 5, is that if there was some great training out there that I knew was solid, rock solid about about how to use the devices and what materials to get to, then I would buy the devices and send my people to the training, so I know that they could implement.
Or
So
better yet,
Yeah.
we have a portal where we put the training available where everyone can get to it in terms of tasks, collaboration, and all of that. And I know that's a piece of the work. I want to make a suggestion. First I'll ask you, are you finished going through the points?
Can I make one
Sure.
last one? And I think that yeah, there's some resources here. There's also lots of opportunities that aren't going to take a ton of resource for that state level coordination and collaboration around, what do we do with the textbook adoption cycle? What about working together on developing materials and resources for folks to use? What about pulling together the ongoing efforts that we all have around professional development and really finding a really great way to deliver the kinds of things that Rob was talking about? I think there are ways for us to pull together and get a lot of this done yeah, there's an investment that's gonna be needed, but I think we can go a long way simply by being creative, working together. This is an area where we can do that.
And as you mentioned earlier, leveraging the partnerships. You know, in terms of investment from OEIB, the other thing that's occurring to me, I know you've all heard Nancy say that she really wants to see us focus on that third grade reading and the literacy piece. So I just wonder, how do we look at ideas like this and get very focused through an area where we want to focus everyone to say, is there a way to sort of focus on that literacy piece through some of these, as we sort of characterize what is the work that needs to be done? I don't know, there might be an opportunity to cross over. I know the other thing I'm going to ask Hilda to help me do is look at these solutions and some of the work already going on to say, where do we make more connections? So we know the teacher network piece is going on, and I'm going to ask Carla in just a second to speak up. I know ODE is working on a portal idea. There are some nuggets of work going on. Again, I concur with the suggestion that at some point you need enough staffing to coordinate and organize all of these efforts and to move the whole plan forward. And we learned that with the ELL proposal. We knew we didn't have enough staff at ODE to do that. And in order to move this forward, it's the same kind of thing. It's going to have to be staffed right in addition to the partnerships. And I think we'll get more fruit when we leverage those partnerships if we have a coordinated effort statewide to ensure that that happens. Hilda, I know you wanted to mention
I was just
something.
going to add that I think that you have some very willing partners in post-secondary who may be doing things in their own world that could so well dovetail if we could expand the task force and include some folks. And I know we'd be glad to help identify some of those as well as some of the providers who are already doing work in various parts of the state.
Carla, I'd like to, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but would you like to speak to some things
I will
that-
say another name left off inadvertently from our list. Carla's been a true contributor. Sorry about that.
Well, you can add both of us.
We obviously have
Carla,
to
do you want to
double check
mention
that.
a couple of those projects you're doing?
Sure, one thing is,
Can you
Rob
come
talked
forward?
about-
Can you come forward?
Sure.
Thank you, and just state your name for the record.
Hi, for the record, I'm Carla Wade from the Oregon Department of Education, where I'm the digital learning or educational technology specialist. We have been doing professional development for about 14 years now with the EdTech Professional Development Cadre, which isn't designed specifically for teachers, it's designed for people providing professional development back at districts and ESDs across the state. And we have, over the years, had about between 100 and now with money being, federal funds being gone, we have about 70 people participating this year. But that's 70 people going back to probably 45 to 50 different districts or ESDs where they have an impact on hundreds of teachers back in their local communities. Many of them have taken that idea. I know Intermountain has been one of those who they still do a local cadre where they can carry on and impact schools and teachers across the region. The other thing that's been mentioned that we've been working on is the education portal. I've gone out to varieties of groups, stakeholders across the state to say, if we could do this, what do you want in it? And we've been gathering that information so that it helps us in designing a resource that is out there for folks. In addition to that, as part of the work back to the cadre, we have created a mobile learning website because of the massive deployment across the state of mobile devices. And in this site, you can ask questions and the community responds to those questions. So it's crowdsourcing the answers to the biggest challenges and the questions that we're facing in our schools around mobile deployment. How do you put applications on your devices? What do you do about kids who don't have access to internet at home? There's also resources on there for applications and teaching sites or professional development sites. There are lesson plans from the EdTech grants that we had where we had 165 teachers across the state developing lessons in math, science, English language arts, English language development, and STEM, and how you integrate technology in that. And again, professional development strategies. So how do you, they're tools that anybody can use and access. You don't have to sign in, be a part of the cadre to access these resources.
Do you have any data on the users of that site? Is it mostly ed tech folks, or do you have an understanding of whether or not it's classroom teachers?
We have, and I don't have that with me, we have a number of hits, but we don't know who's doing it. We do have, one of the things you do when you use the site is you can sign up to get badges for adding questions or adding responses, and we know we have over 1,300 people across the state on this that are active users of the site.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
We definitely will be having more conversation about this. Boyd, did you want to add?
I just wanted to ask Carla, so how many staff members at ODE are dedicated to technology and instruction?
Me, but I also do IndyStar, which is all of the district improvement planning. The good thing about that, though, is I've been able to embed the technology as a couple of the indicators that are in the district improvement planning process for schools. So there has never been a full-time educational technology person in the Department of Ed since 2000, which it's been me, and I've done Title I or Title II or a variety of other things.
So what portion of your job is really dedicated to this technology part?
Probably about 0.5.
You know, and Carla's done just amazing work with the time that she has, but 0.5 for the entire state for technology and instruction. Time to power up, right?
Yes.
That was why I created the cadre to build capacity across the state. I needed some help,
And
and I
you've done
have
a
lots
great
of
job
partners.
with that. Yeah, you've really reached out. Well, thank you. Again,
Thank
I
you.
apologize for putting you on the spot, but I'm glad you were here
Not a
and you can
problem.
speak to those. We will continue to help make the connections as we prioritize. Just so you know, for our next steps on this committee, we do have this on our sort of year agenda for what we're going to take as recommendations to OEIB. We'll be having that conversation today about some priorities. I'm not sure we'll get to these. Do we have this one on the schedule for today?
You just need to decide which group is going to pick this up.
Okay, we'll do that. And then we will be working with the Outcomes and Investment Committee in July to talk about the areas where we're recommending investment. I'm sure we'll be coming back to ODE as well as the COSA group to help us get the numbers and rationale and whatever else we might need to go to that committee. So Hilda will be following up with you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Okay. Lynn, we did get an update on the Early Learning Council from Kim. I don't know if there's anything to add. She spoke about your phone conference. And welcome, Kay.
Thank you.
Pardon me?
So I'm sorry, this is Lynn. Were you asking me, did someone do an early learning report earlier when I was tied up?
Kim did that for you.
Great, okay. And so I just want to be sure that we have because this has come up in several settings, is that our focus is very sharply on the return on investment for kindergarten readiness. And so I think there's some perceptions perhaps in the process that we're pushing really hard on that front. This committee probably thinks that's a good direction to be pushing, but that's a really key component to all the work proposals we're reviewing and have underway.
All right, thank you for adding that piece, and thanks for joining us. We're going to move on to 6.0 on our agenda, School Leadership in Oregon, Initial Findings and Recommendations from the Chalkboard Distinguished Leadership Council. Krista Parent from South Lane, she's a superintendent, and Dan Jameson from Chalkboard.
Great, thank you. This feels like old home. It's great to see you all again and reconnect. So for the record, I am Dan Jameson. I'm an advisor to the Chalkboard Project, former vice president. And Kristen?
I'm Krista Parent, South Lane School District Superintendent, and I've been the chair of the Distinguished Leaders Council.
I'd like to offer a few comments just about our context for sharing today. I think, as you know, with Chalkboard, we've been involved in educator effectiveness over the course of the last decade. We've really championed the same things that you believe in, and that is research-based practices. What are the approaches that have the greatest impact for kids, and approaches that directly address the achievement and opportunity gaps in the state. So that's been our guiding focus over the course of the last decade. Obviously, we've worked in teacher preparation, performance evaluation, school district collaboration grants, mentorship, all of those practices that we know are highly leveraged to improve our profession. We do believe, and the reason that we are here today, we think there's great opportunity for a fresh look at leader preparation. And prior to jumping into leader preparation and our recommendations, I want to offer just a couple of caveats or a little bit of caution. Number one, we believe that we're on the very front end of this work. We consider today to be the beginning of a conversation, not only with OEIB, but also with our stakeholders who are in this room and also around the state. We have begun this work, and what we present to you today are initial findings. The second caveat that we would offer is that while we have engaged several stakeholders coming into this point in time today, we recognize that there's deeper engagement that needs to be done. Krista and I will be gathering our leaders together on June the 13th here in another month. We understand that we're moving to our next deeper level of work, and we understand that along with that is greater explanation, greater engagement, greater participation by all of the key affected stakeholders in the state. So with that being said, why leadership and why now? Krista?
So I just kind of want to cut to the chase and say that we don't think we're going to get to 40-40-20 without a corresponding focus on leadership effectiveness like we've had on teacher effectiveness. And I think we've seen that teacher effectiveness has gotten us pretty far, but we still have a gap that we need to close, and we still have many students that aren't achieving at the levels that we need them to achieve at. So we want to elevate this leadership conversation to be on par with the teacher effectiveness work. We want both of those things to be in place in order to help us get to 40-40-20. We've broken down the leadership work kind of into two categories. There's this side about pre-service administrators and the preparation that those folks are receiving in order to better prepare them to meet the demands of the 40-40-20 goal. And then on the other side, we can't forget about our thousands of existing administrators, and we think there's work to be done in that area as well. So our Distinguished Leaders Council has really broke that into two kind of work groups, and we're focused on aspects of each of those parts of the equation. And so again, we think that leadership work has kind of taken a back seat to the teacher effectiveness conversation, and our mission is really to elevate this conversation and to get after some of this work on both preparation and for existing administrators.
Great. We want to share a little bit about the leaders who comprise this group. The group was explicitly recruited for diversity, range of experience, geographical representation, and also the notion that we need to be sensitive to district size because there are different dynamics with each setting that we have in Oregon. We have a superintendent from a district of 220, Sally Storm in McKenzie. We also have a teacher union leader. We believe that teacher voice and participation in leader preparation and defining possibility is absolutely essential. And I would commend the contributions of our colleague Kathleen Sundell from Salem Kaiser, a district of more than 400,000 students. We have a university leader, Cheryl Brown, who not only has worked in leader preparation in conventional programs through Willamette University, she also is part of a hybrid program, a new innovation that is being hosted by COSA in Concordia out of the University of Concordia in Chicago. We have an assistant principal with very little experience and a principal with very little experience. We have folks from Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, the Valley, and the metro area. And there I would point out Erica Gagne, the dynamic leader of Earl Boyles Elementary School, and David Douglas School District, who's a recent Oregon Principal of the Year. I also want to offer just a couple of comments about process. Our good friend and colleague Pooja Bhatt, who is educated at the University of Pittsburgh and graduate work at the University of Michigan, spent the better part of 4 to 5 months researching not only what was unfolding in Oregon, but also what are the promising practices that we see beginning to emerge nationally. And she compiled a tremendous amount of research. She also interviewed 5 of the 8 preparation programs in Oregon. We interviewed national preparation programs like Broad, Rainwater, the Wallace Foundation, Hillsborough County Schools, and the New York City Leadership Academy. The findings were summarized then for our Distinguished Leaders Group, and they met in January, February, and March. And since that time, Pooja, Krista, and I have tried to bundle together not only what are the key highlights of the research, but what are the initial recommendations based upon this very first dive that we have done. So with that being said, we want to share with you some of the key takeaways that we see.
So I'll direct you to the screen, and these are the 6 takeaways that came out of about 6 months of just really diving deep into the literature and the research. The first takeaway being that coursework and internships for leadership preparation are really a one-size-fits-all model. There isn't any discernment between geographic areas where people might be working, focus and priority schools, work, superintendents versus assistant principals. You know, we're preparing leaders all kind of in the same manner. And we think that the coursework and the internship work could be better in terms of the preparation. Our programs currently admit just about everybody. In the continuing licensure program, the rate is at about 100%. In the initial licensure program, the rate's somewhere between 70 and 80%. And we think there's work to be done in that area in terms of collaborating with school districts to recruit and admit the best candidates for those programs. We also have a real void in data about our administrators in this state in terms of what programs they're coming out of, where they're being placed, how successful they're being, what their retention rate is in the various school districts. We really hit a void there in trying to get good data to help us with our recommendations, and we need a system in place that tracks that information. We obviously have pockets of exceptions, and that shouldn't be the case, but you know, depending on where you're at, you get support in your leadership work as you're beginning your administrator career, depending on the school district that you're in. And we think that leaders across the state ought to have that same support and experience regardless of the district that they're placed in. And then we also have learned that there's a growing national movement on this topic, and Dan mentioned some of the programs. We're very impressed by a couple of new programs, Stand By Me out of the University of Washington, where they literally guarantee that if you hire an administrator out of their program, that individual will be successful. And if they're not, they will bring in at no charge to the district a coach to bring that administrator up to the standard you need them to be at to lead student achievement and equity. So we're impressed with that program. There's also a new leaders program that is has a highly rigorous admittance process, and we're really intrigued by some of these programs around the country, and we think that, you know, we ought to jump on the bandwagon and see what we can do here in Oregon to make sure that we have great leaders. We know that leadership is second only to the quality of instruction in terms of student achievement, and we know that a teacher impacts the students in their classroom. But think about the potential impact of a principal or a central office administrator, because they have the ability to impact everyone in the school, students and staff included. And again, we think that this discussion has taken a little bit of a back seat in terms of funding and in terms of importance, and we want to change that.
So I think with that, we want to move into the specific recommendations, and you will see a correlation between the key takeaways and the recommendations that we are sharing today. First and foremost, and I will also share with you, this is the strongest and most unanimously endorsed recommendation, and that is a belief by our members that we need to completely revamp the current administrator practicum approach. The experience is, according to our members and folks that we hear from in the field, is that the experience is short on time, weak on substance, and by the way, in our conversations with representatives of ORPEA, our higher ed partners are also convinced that this is an area that we need to examine as well. Currently, a teacher works a full schedule, 40, 50, 60 hours during the week, and then they are asked to put together a few hundred hours of practicum experience during the school year. With a full teaching load, do they then water down their teaching effort? Are they supposed to squeeze in the practicum during prep time at night on weekends? I have a son-in-law who's in residency, his second year of medical residency in Pennsylvania, and I'm appalled at the way he is treated. And I have to tell you, based upon my experience as a principal and as a superintendent, what we do for our potential school leaders is not much better. So what if we take this weakness, and what if, let's suspend disbelief, what if we were to flip this and make this become the strength? Our folks believe that practical experience, practical application is the best instructive learning for school leaders to be. And what if we were to take the case that we could create a half year of full-time release for a resident school leader, or a full year of half-time release, and allow that burgeoning leader to experience all of the demands of what school leadership really is? What would that make possible? And then how also could we differentiate a residency to support our newly recruited diverse candidates? And what would be possible if we took a residency and intentionally designed it to prepare leaders to become the leaders of our focus and our priority schools? So let's take that area that's gap, and what is the possibility to turn that into a strength? We believe that college coursework as well needs to be looked at with a fresh look and with fresh questions about where we have strength. Now, I know that there are colleagues in this room who underwent the same training that I did, and I look back at curriculum, tort liability, school law, board policy, facility management, fiscal preparation, school finance, and the whole 9 yards. All of those topics are essential. They are important. But unfortunately, we have treated them in our delivery as separate silos. We know that we have school leaders that need to be prepared in those skills that transcend time and place. And what are those skills? We believe that our leaders need to be trained first and foremost in issues of equity. We believe that they need to be instructional leaders. That needs to be a gateway, a litmus test to becoming a school leader. You have to be an instructional leader first. What is the preparation, what is the consistency where we deliver in our programs explicit training around emotional intelligence? And then what is the training around those core skills of adaptive leadership? Now, if we were to state this in real common sense terms, David and I could be interacting with a leader who is absolutely skilled in tort liability, school law. He could be a curriculum leader. She could be very wonderful in facilities management. And that individual may not have the fundamental skills to listen, to know how to engage in a crucial conversation, how to engage stakeholders, and what are those skills of empathy that we know all leaders need as they encounter different audiences. So we want to identify a common core set of leadership skills that all leaders need to have that should be uniformly taught throughout our preparation programs. And then also, I think Krista alluded to this, and I think she explained this very well. We believe that we have some work to do around recruitment and selection. While we know that we want to honor those folks who are interested in getting into school leadership, we would describe the current system not as selection, but as open enrollment. It's really pretty much everyone who wants to get in gets in. Now, there are exceptions to that. But the truth is, in the state, we believe right now that we have more than 4,500 folks who actively hold licenses in the state, and only about less than half of that are currently placed in positions. So we need to look at recruitment and selection. We need to ask the questions about rigor. And by the way, what are the incentives for programs to elevate rigor, and then have some type of incentive for an elevated type of training that we would describe? So, Krista, how about existing administrators?
I just want to point out that at least with the Distinguished Leaders Council, we prioritized these 6 recommendations, and I personally thought it was very interesting that the top 3 were on the pre-service side. And I think that's a little bit of function of it's easier for us to point fingers at somebody else needs to change the work and do some different work than to actually look internally. I think it's a little cleaner and easier to envision what we might do on the preparation side. And so I was a little disappointed myself that the supports for existing administrators came in the 4th, 5th, and 6th spot, because I think that's something that we need to take a big look at internally, and I think it's a little messier to figure out how to do that work better. So the 3 recommendations on the supporting existing administrators, we lead off with what we called learning-focused leadership. And basically, we need to have leaders that are focused on the right work. They know instruction deeply. They know how to get 3rd graders to be, fluent, well-comprehending readers. By the end of 3rd grade, that's an important set of skills for an administrator to have. They need to be focused on the right work. They need to know how to get into classrooms, how to give teachers effective feedback, how to follow up on that feedback and make sure that it's making a difference. And so that led off the supporting existing administrators' recommendations. We're giving administrators impossible jobs. I think about a high school principal, and we say we want them to be instructional leaders, and then we ask them to also be the disciplinarian, the community engager, the counselor, the technology expert, and sometimes even the custodian, and then wonder why they aren't focused on the right work in terms of instructional leadership. So the second recommendation, number 5, is crucial to this as well, about having a qualified support network for folks that are in the system. You know, in the mentoring project, you can support an early career administrator in their first or second year, but there are a lot of administrators that still need that support and that network in their 15th, 20th, and 25th year. We heard a lot of stories from folks, even within the Distinguished Leaders Council, about not being able to access quality support of colleagues in their area to help on some of these really difficult problems. And then the final recommendation is around expanded career pathways. You know, we've done a lot of work for teacher career pathways, and we want to somehow be able to look at this as a system. So the work that Chalkboard's done with career pathways on the teacher side, we want to fold that right into our career pathways for administrators. And it comes back to that notion of we have to be focused on the right work, and we have to make the job manageable. And I think there is a role to play here in terms of retraining central office folks and superintendents. Because if folks in the schools aren't getting the kind of support that they need, then shame on central office and superintendent folks, because they should be providing that kind of support and be a part of that network. So there's something for all of us to own, you know, on the university preparation side, but as well on the existing administrators in central office and superintendent positions too.
In summary, we see this as the beginning of work. We see it as the beginning of a conversation, a little bit about our next steps. We fully expect to be deeply engaged throughout this summer and the next several months in the coming year. Also, we know that we need to reach out to additional partners that we have not had enough contact with yet. And also, we want to loop back with those individuals that we've met with already to make sure that we stay well informed about the realities and also what is changing, because we understand that we're operating in a dynamic environment. We also were interested in beginning to examine a pilot program. So what could that look like? And if we were to put together our collective best hopes and aspirations, how would we frame that? How would we do that collaboratively? And what would the yield be, not only for our state, but certainly the way we would measure success is what would be the impact for our kids in classrooms and our staff in schools. So with that, we would be happy to entertain any questions and hopefully offer some clarification.
So I have a question.
Great.
It reminds me of the conversation we had around the ELL and the question that came into that about, is it licensure we want, or is it the skills? And what became part of that is also the attitudes. And when I wrote down here for myself, as you were talking about those we have in our system, one of the things I would just throw in as a wish list, since I can right this moment, is the idea of how do we either assess or build political will to do the tough work. So we can build lots of skills in people, we can make them instructional leaders, but when the going gets tough and they're by themselves facing a teaching staff or a community that is resistant to change, for all the reasons that we know that are out there in our pioneer state, who thinks they're leaders sometimes but uses it as an excuse to stay doing the current things we're doing. I'm noticing that in my administrators, I can put all those other structures there, but if they just don't have that political will, and I don't know how to, I'd love to know how you build that in somebody.
It's much harder to teach,
Yeah.
You know, Yvonne, I think that's a great observation, and I think back to some of the work of Gallup and prior to that, Selection Research Incorporated, and they identify that theme or that trait as mission, and it's non-negotiable. And the message is, and you and I have heard a friend say this, I'm going to do it or we're going to die trying.
Right.
And that's how you rally the troops, so absolutely yes.
So some of that is assessing that at the beginning to see if
Yes.
that's innate. The other thing you reminded me of as we talked about the skills, and I was just sort of imagining as you were talking about the possibilities. This one person from Intel has been coaching me as a new superintendent as we work through the strategic plan process, and honestly, that piece is another piece to think about, where we look for partners to mentoring that are outside education,
Yes.
so we can learn to think differently if we really want to prepare our kids for the jobs that are outside education, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. And she showed me this image of, the stair step, and she said, I'm starting to understand that in education, you tend to take really good teachers, they join an admin program, and then you jump them to the next program. And she said, I'm wondering, do you do any conversation, or do you have any understanding of the skills it takes to go to the next level? But even more importantly, and you talked about the extended pathways, is we jump people, and in some districts, they just go and do it all in one position. And we still don't even know. So what she's been helping me do is back up in my career and say, did I even have all the skills, and where are my gaps? How do I get those? And then how do I do that for my leaders beyond principals? Because I actually think we do a better job of preparing principals than any other position. The others are just like, you just grab people and they look like ready and brave, and we throw them into the positions and say, figure it out. That's been my experience, and I don't know anybody else in the roles I've been in that's had any different experience. So I love the extended pathways all the way to superintendent, because some people need to know at the very beginning that going to a superintendent is maybe not where they're going. So why do we put them in those kinds of situations when we could be better using their skills? But I think it's because we don't know how to articulate what those stair steps are.
I'll tell you, in the research that we did, the New Leaders Program, I think, might be on the right track for exactly what you're talking about. They put potential leaders through a program. It's about an 18-month program before they ever even enter an administrative prep program. And in that process, they'll have cohorts of about 40, and about 8 people max out of the 40 will then move on into a preparation program. And so they do a lot of what you're talking about in that program.
It's very exciting.
Related to that question, we've also wondered, and this comes from within our group, are we arriving at a point in the state where we need to have programs that, in addition to these core skills that we've described, offer specialization? So is there a preparation program that is really rich and deep on the needs of leader preparation for rural schools? How many rural schools do we have in the state of Oregon, and what are we doing to support those folks with their needs? And how's that different from Krista's district, or from a Salem, or from a Portland? And then what is the preparation that's required for, as we mentioned before, priority and focus schools? So what would be possible if we gave the support to our higher ed partners to really go deep in some of those immediate emergent needs that we can readily identify in Oregon, and align those programs to make sure that we have powerful delivery? There's some of that that's emerging, but what if it were more formalized and more robust? And what if we as a state made a commitment to do just that?
And another area is one that we tend not to think about because we're thinking about instructional leadership and moving those people up. But right now I'm struggling with the whole business manager piece.
Yes.
And what I realize is there really isn't a preparation program that I can reach into and say, who would you recommend? I mean, even if I take somebody that we could grow, we're actually deciding to do that in my district. We'll take our really good accountant who looks like she has leadership potential, and let's see if we can grow our own. But what do I know about that? How am I going to support that? And I do know we have OASBO, that they have an association, but we don't have a preparation program where we can really look to not only for that part, but the professional development. So I think of all those other positions that aren't instructional pieces, that if you're an instructional leader that becomes a superintendent, now there's all that business part that you have no experience with. And that's why I think there's other partnerships that can be created with business people to help us run our districts like really good businesses at the same time. At least I've learned that's a value I needed to have, and now it's a strong value for me. I want to look to the committee to see if anyone has comments or questions. Yes, and thank you for doing the work. I love that you said there are many partners to still work with. You're still in the beginning. I know there's some new standards coming out for administrators, and I know we have organizations that are working on this. And I just want to say, as I've continued to say since I had the opportunity to be along in this work, is that I think as a state we're doing great work because we are working collaboratively and we are embracing everyone who's doing whatever piece of work we're trying to do. And I think that way we don't waste so much time dealing with the opposition, but instead doing what we're really good about doing in education, and that is educating people, from our legislature, our governor, whoever asks for the information, when we're all in it together and it's collaborative and we're all informing, they don't have to watch for where might the darts come, but know that we're all right there in front of them working on it together. So I love knowing that you are still planning to do that part of the work.
Sure.
Hilda?
And just as a context, I know that this year when the charge for this committee was formalized, there was a concern that over the summer there had been an audit from the Secretary of State specific to educator preparation. And I remember having a conversation with Nancy Golden that we wanted to make sure that that didn't just kind of get left off of the radar screen. And so that was added into the charge of this committee. And I'm pretty certain that one of the things that would be of great interest would be to do the same thing now without sans the audit. We don't need the audit. But to have the same kind of deep focus for this committee as this work moves forward, so that we are prepared next year at this time to also make very specific recommendations relative to leadership in our state. So it's not really an oversight, but it was actually something that came about as a result of the events this summer, and making sure that we were supporting the carry out of that work.
And it sounds like the timing is right now. You're saying this is an initial piece of work, you have your recommendations ready, there's other groups that you're planning to join within the work. So I think sometime in the fall would be great to ask the collaborative of whoever's doing that work to come back. And what's really helped us is looking at items like you have there, where you have the recommendation or the barrier, and here's a solution. So the recommendations might be broader for your whole collaborative in that you're working on different things, but what we're gonna need to know is, what do you need from us? Where do you see certain barriers in sort of our OEIB system and this P20 system we're trying to create? And where do you see specific solutions? And even if you can be as specific to speak to policy versus investment, and then also kind of continue to inform us about where is the good work that's happening, including pilots. So if you're doing a pilot, there's other organizations, higher ed and so on, doing pilots. It's helpful for us to be able to look at the whole gamut, especially if we're going to talk about key investments at some point, which I'm sure we'll continue to move forward on that. It seems like it's starting to bear some fruit. And so if there's already pilots, we might say, instead of creating new ideas, let's start with what's already out there and what people are starting to get started with. Anything else to add?
For the record, is the research report that Pooja put together available to inform the subcommittee?
We are working on a final written report, which is not nearly complete.
Okay.
And we definitely will ship
Okay.
that to you and
Great.
make sure that that's there, plus any other additional information that
Thank
you
you.
would ask for.
It's supposed to be ready just about the middle of June, and so we'll get that to you right away. I just also wanted to mention that on these Saturdays that the Distinguished Leaders Council met together, Nancy, Craig Hawkins, and Sarah Pope all spent one full Saturday with us, working with the group, so they're very much up to speed on the work as well.
Great.
But
So
no one from OACTE was there?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Unless, I don't know that Cheryl is a member of OCADE.
Cheryl Brown.
Right,
I don't know,
okay.
so.
It's not really a membership.
So in the fall, I guess I will probably look to Hilda sometime in September to sort of get in touch with every group that might be working on the same thing and see who's ready to come. Then when we get ready to prioritize the recommendations and kind of decide what do we think we're going to send forward to the full OEIB for investment or policy, we want to have you be a part of that conversation. So
Excellent.
you join our groups as we start to prioritize that as experts.
Great. We
Thanks so
welcome
much,
that. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let's see, looking at our agenda, we're ready to move to our work groups. I think haven't taken a little break. Go ahead.
So first of all, for the record, we are on time. I think that might be the first time this year. And secondly, given that Lynn Saxton reminds us the importance of following our scope of work. I'm hopeful that members will take a look at the revised scope of work and see that we are actually right where we're supposed to be at this point in the year, and that we are moving forward with the idea that in June, we will be bringing forward suggestions, recommendations related to specifically tasks that we think a particular group should be looking more deeply at. It could be to OEIB, it could be to HEC, or to Early Learning Council, or to ODE, or to TSPC. That would be one very major set of recommendations. There would also be a call out for any kinds of policies that we believe need to be revisited, tweaked, reviewed, so that we do remove existing barriers that we've come into counter with this year. And then, most important too, we must prepare for the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee a list of probably 1 to 2, at the most probably 3, potential strategic investments. And we've had a lot of discussion at the OEIB staff meetings recently about this. And those of you that are with us at the full board meeting this afternoon will have an opportunity to review this in depth. But we've really used the 3 strategies that, for budget strategies that we used last time in our work group to guide our thinking about, well, is something really building a statewide system? Is it a very focused state investment? Or is it something that's really about coordination across agencies? In addition to that, the OEIB staff are bringing forward this afternoon some key questions that any group that, such as this subcommittee, any recommendations for strategic investments must go through this filter. And I just want to call out some of these filters before we break into the work groups, and I think you're suggesting a short break between that. But one of the things that we're very key on is to think about whether or not the strategic investment is related to some level of repurposing, reallocating, or allocating existing funds differently. So that's number 1 question that you might want to keep in your mind. Secondly, we want to make sure that if there is a tie-in to the achievement compacts or to some other known outcome metric that we've been holding up for the entire state's vision, that we keep that in mind, such as, you know, things that the early learning hubs are focused on, etc. Third, we are very keen on looking at what measurable differences for students and their families that this strategic investment might result in. And by when? Is this something that's a short-term result or a longer-term result? And then what would we use to measure whether or not there has been some level of an impact? And number 4 is a reminder, which we continue to do, is to look through the equity lens as a measure of how we are aligning with the values that we have adopted as a board and as agencies in the state. We also want to look, several of us mentioned today, relating back to evidence. What's the evidence that we have that an investment in a particular area would result in improvement? And then I think this one will be a little harder to answer early on, but will an investment have a small, medium, or substantial impact? Can we determine that? And, you know, estimating that. And are there some other conditions or supports that are going to have to be in place to support a strategic investment working? And the very last one, because you're wondering if this list goes on and on. The very last one is, are there any state or federal policies or activities that we are going to have to think about because it could impact either costs or implementation? And I will, while the groups are starting to get set up, I think I'm going to try to get those. They're not in a compact slide yet. So I don't really have a great way of bringing them up to the front here, but I think some of you jotted down little reminders of those, and if you need to look at the list, we can give you a copy. Okay.
Sounds good. So I'm just gonna explain what we're gonna do when we come back from the break, and then we'll take a break. We're gonna break into the groups we did last time, because we have quite a few recommendations to look at. And it's actually a bit of work to do, but I think we're sort of prepared for that. What I want you to do is look at all of the recommendations that are assigned to your group. And in my group is the English language learner and the educator, early learner, ELL, and educator quality. And the other group is rural and remote and student transitions.
And then where do you
And we
want to
have to
place
decide.
the power up?
I don't know, it looks like we both have about the same amount. Looks like we have one.
So I wasn't here physically last meeting, so where do you want me to go?
How about if you join, let's see, I don't know when Mark's coming back, but if he's not back, I'm gonna look to David to lead that group. And Hilda, were you with that group?
I was with that group.
And Kim and I were together, and Vicki, you were with us. If you would join us again, that would be great. So why don't we go ahead and have you do that? And then Lynn, are you still on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
you
so
stay here?
Kim and I can sit right here by the phone so that you can participate with us, and so we'll ask you guys to move off to the side a little bit. So what we want you to do is to identify the top 1 to 2 investments. So you're going to look at all of them and prioritize those that are investments and those that are policies. So you're kind of calling out, this one we think is going to take investment, this one we think is just a policy thing, and then prioritize those. Now, where I think it's going to get a little tricky is that you might have more than one number one for policies, because you're going to hand them off to, like I know in mine, they're going off to different agencies, so you might be able to have more than one number one. But in terms of the investments, we really need to get tight on what are the most important investments. And those are the ones that Hilda and I will take to the investment committee in July. So,
The good news is that those 8 questions are in your notebook. We did have our act together. So
That's
7.0.
So you need the sheet that says 7.0.
This is Lana. Can you point me in the right direction to the document you're referring to, or is this something I don't have?
So you should have a Excel spreadsheet that's color-coded.
Right.
And then there is a document, a one-pager that's entitled Presentation, well, when you open it, it says Presentation Template and Instructions, Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee. It just has those 8 questions that I mentioned earlier.
Okay, and I got the presentation template and instructions. And is it the template, is it the Excel spreadsheet that's pink or yellow?
Well, it
Or
starts
what?
off yellow and it changes colors because everything is color-coded by the area.
Okay, so this is the one it says first draft of recommendations at the top?
Yes.
Got
So you'll want to look at the yellow pages that say early learning and English learners, as well as the purple that's educator quality. And why don't I go ahead and have our group take on the e-learning piece
Okay.
as well. Craig, if you want to join our group, that would be great, if you'd like to be a part of that. So looking at the time, let's try to be in our spots doing that. By 11:30, if you get back early, you can start reading and categorizing. 15 minutes till 11:30. Oh,
No, they have more time.
no, I'm just saying for the break at 11:30. And then we can probably take 12:10. Can we take that much time? Okay, that'd be great. And we have 40 minutes then when we come back to work in our groups. Okay?
Hello, may I get a copy of that document?
Pardon?
May I get a copy of the document?
Yes. We have an extra set of materials. Should be right there, Vicki, on the table. And these are also online for anybody who has downloaded materials for today's meeting. Peter, do you want to come up and join this group?
Sure, join us.
Well, no, we have executive.
For what?
Well,
the
if you want to be
conversation.
in a conversation, because I'm going to be with that group and that would kind of
Oh, sure.
split.
So what are the two work groups?
This
So,
is continuing our work from
I'm
last
sorry,
time.
I
It's
was
okay.
pulled out, so
Yeah,
I missed
we're
what.
continuing our work from last time. So if you wanted to engage, I was going to offer that to you because we'll have a group over here and a group here.
Maybe
so this group is early learning and the teacher
The
part is the
digital conversion.
digital part. So
Sure.
you-
That'd be great.
Good.
You bet.
Just come and choose one of these seats because
Okay.
they're gonna move somewhere else.
Okay, great.
Okay, just close up Mark's book here first.
All righty.
I don't know if Mark's.
You look
page
lonely,
on it.
Peter.
I'll tell him, like you really wanted more work.
Okay.
Well,
I'll
let you set up some policies.
Yep.
Hopefully we can work around those.
I just want you to know I have a legit group number dog.
I'll be back.
What do you want us? I can go right here. Right there?
Do you want me?
That way, Lynn.
That would be nice.
Probably all
There's
good,
no
right?
coffee and people want to join around.
So Kay, I think you're gonna join, well, this group or that? I'd like you to join Hilda's group, I'm sorry. I'll get clear about that.
I'm just temporary leaving.
She's a little good right now. She needs
I will
inside
share
help.
it. I thought that's what you
She
said.
doesn't need help, but she needs, you're up here.
I will just keep my allotted space.
So, but he's in Hilda's group anyway.
We've lost Mark.
I know.
Must be
He walked out with the phone.
I know, it must be an important phone call. All right. Okay.
Yvonne, you mind if we just listen in?
No, I don't mind at all.
Cool.
No, it's just hearing I do not. So I will try to take notes and,
So I'm gonna ask you to
and
make your
those
questions,
questions,
whoever
any
doesn't
questions to write them down.
because I didn't do a very,
Are you sure? Okay, me too.
I didn't do a very good job last time, and Hilda couldn't read my handwriting, and I couldn't. Oh my
Oh,
God.
that's.
It's hard to facilitate, watch the time and write.
It's very difficult. Just getting at garble.
Yeah.
And so I.
So, okay, we're gonna start with early learning. Lynn, are you with us on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we're gonna look at the early learning, and there's 3 recommendations there. One is to invest in early development of easy CBM Spanish measures, value-aligned English Spanish measures for benchmarking and progress learning for RTI. The second one is further develop the Spanish version of the KRA to enable more accurate assessments. So those two are really tied. It really is the easy CBM measures.
I don't have.
And the next one is ensure that all students in Oregon have access to full-day kindergarten in 2015. Leverage school calendar for needed PD for kindergarten. Make this a priority and address funding needs for personnel and resources. So having heard from that group, I think their number one priority would be funding full-day kindergarten so that it isn't left for school districts to choose. It's really saying every student, every kindergarten in Oregon should have full-day kindergarten. So the first
So,
thing.
can I just ask a quick question? When you say that group, you're referring to,
The COSA group that made the recommendations around the full-day kindergarten. It was the COSA
Right.
No,
group.
actually it was the part 1,
and
part
so
2.
one of my questions is that so where the early learning council sits.
Yes.
From the research that we've gotten so far, although I think that's an important thing to do I think that is are there other things that we may be able to do more cost effectively upstream from that would have a greater, larger impact? I think that's an as yet unanswered question. And so I don't know how that fits in here, but I think that it is a valid question of whether doing that with all the costs and the implications of that is as important as other things that can be done upstream. I don't think the Early Learning Council either have that discussion and is only beginning to see the kind of ROI information that would help us make that decision. So for me, I think that I fully understand, and I think the Early Learning Council gets the importance of developing the Spanish version of the kindergarten readiness assessment. But I don't think I would not be ready at this point to say the most important thing we do is fund full-day kindergarten with all that that entails. Because I don't think we know, don't get me wrong, I think full-day kindergarten is a great thing and a critical piece. But in terms of our objective, I couldn't represent that the Early Learning Council at this stage would prioritize that.
Okay, and so I'm just gonna add from a superintendent perspective that we do have a statute that says we should offer full-day kindergarten. And some of us are going to do it and some may not. And so we're now creating more inequity and creating just another place. I guess I'm just trying to find out how else would we invest, like you were mentioning further upstream or downstream, however you want, I guess it's upstream.
So earlier when they.
Yeah, if you invest earlier, how else do we make sure that happens systematically and systemically across the state without another statute? So I think a lot of us are feeling like we at least got one that said full-day kindergarten. We would love to have one that said preschool too. I think that's the next step. This group was recommending we go. So how about other thoughts?
But I guess my question is, the early learning group is tasked with up to kindergarten. So if the K through 12 system wants to make a decision that it wants to take its resources and allocate to getting full-day kindergarten, that makes sense to me. I guess there's a question on the table here because the early learning piece with our resources, we don't currently fund kindergarten. And from an early learning perspective, I don't know that with our current funding, we could, with our part of the funding, that we would say, okay, in our portfolio of responsibilities for the 0 through 5 age group, and in the proposals that we have before us right now, we see these things as being the highest priority. And certainly, one of our high priorities is that kindergarten readiness assessment to help the K through 12 system get what it needs, number one. And number two is to help us prioritize what needs to be done before kindergarten. So to me, this is really something that is less in our wheelhouse or responsibility or funding, and more in the K through 12 piece. And I may have that wrong, so I'm just throwing that out there. That's my understanding of where those lines of accountability lie.
So I hear you coming from an early learning council position on this. As a member of this committee, we are a committee of the whole OEIB board, which is the P through 20. So I think we're supposed to be looking from that sort of 60,000 foot view of looking down on the system to say how high priority do we think this is for the whole building of this system. It's not just looking at the little piece of maybe early learning money. It's not even our job to decide whether it will be funded. It's just giving our feedback from this committee to the full board. Do we think funding full-day kindergarten for every student is important? So it's really getting at that equity or equal
So
piece.
thank you, that's really helpful, and I would say it's really important, and so I would say it's a very high priority. I do not think that the presentation of COSA is the full analysis of the cost implications, and I think I said that at our last meeting. I think there's many ways to get there, and they outlined a very credible way to get there, but I do believe that before any plan was implemented to comply with the legislation, that there's more work that needs to be done.
Okay, and that would be part of the next piece of work with the outcome. So if we look at the questions, we don't have time to go through all these questions on everything. But I'm just gonna say for my part, as a superintendent, I think it's a perfect opportunity to make this a priority and do it right. We rarely get the opportunity to do initiatives right in this state. Wouldn't it be nice to try to figure that out? So at least from this group, do we think that's a pretty high priority out of those? So I feel like there's really two boxes right here under the early learning. One is really invest in easy CBM and make sure the Spanish measures can be an effective measure, not just for the KRA, but through that whole early learning piece to third grade, because we have no other measures.
Exactly.
And so I guess, to me, I think they're priority 1 and 2 together. And other than that, I don't think there's any policy barriers here that we would recommend anything for. I think it's just resourcing them. And I don't think the Spanish measures one is a huge resource when you look at the whole state policy.
It'd be one investment and then it would be trivial to then reproduce that for the district. It scales.
Well, they're doing a lot.
I guess one thing that has come up a lot from teachers around investments, and around assessments, that I think would be appropriate here is, are there existing first and second grade assessments that are being given that could be replaced by this, so we're not necessarily layering on a third or fourth level of assessment, but we're replacing ones? That's what I hear from teachers is, do you find out how many assessments are already being given?
Right. And so I think if we were to even move this question up to a higher level, the question would be, what measures can we, should be using in programs where we have kids in a Spanish and English program? And we need to measure both of those to see if they're on track. So that's really the question. So we could throw it back to ODE with saying, we think it's priority to resource that if it needs resourcing, but maybe first analyzing, is there something else that would be resourced? And how do we scale that up or make recommendations?
Okay, that's why, okay, because I was saying,
where there are
so that's in teacher prep. And then, another thing I'm.
So I think we think it's important, but we also think it's important to go figure out what else is being used.
Well, yeah, that too, but,
Okay, and we don't think there's any policy issues around that.
dual credit.
So Hilda reminded me that they did
Is that
English
somewhere
learners
else?
last time, so we're not
It's
going
under
to
level
that part.
13.
Move to the
And I think
purple
part of the
part.
problem is.
Lynn, we are now on the purple part, which is educator quality. So again, we're looking as a P20 subcommittee of OEIB, and we're saying, what is priority, which things require resource, and which things are really policy. And we have a long list here, and a lot of them, TSPC has, we have coded them as responsible or have some level of responsibility. So I'm going to ask Vicki if you've had a chance to think about any of these, or if you want to, shall we walk through them one by one?
Sure. Well, I would say that I haven't had any conversations with anybody on the key content for secondary preparation. I guess that's really college and career ready standards, right?
Yes.
All right.
Now, this is one that,
The second part is,
if this were to
will
truly
it
happen,
require
would require
legislation to allow
additional base
teachers
funding.
to change that policy? The government
Because
ethics,
basically right
government
now,
ethics
schools
say
are,
right now that universities are
they don't
not
offer
able to
many
reimburse
students are not
cooperating
taking
teachers in school
And
districts
so that's actually
directly
the savings.
in terms of a stipend or other
But
measure like
you're
that
hearing
without
and some of the work
without
that
it
some
being
of the
an
learning committee has shown is
So
that
what the
if
ethics
students
commission
were
has told
utilizing
school
time
districts
in
and
the
teachers
senior
is
year
that
to
if
start,
the
addressing
money
areas that
actually
they
went
need
directly to the
become
district
college
and
ready
distributed
and
payroll to the
access to
teacher
credit
through the
courses.
district,
do get
it's
college
okay.
credit in areas where
Wow.
It also butts
That
up
helps
against the
streamline
whole,
that.
there aren't a whole lot of higher ed resources to support cooperating teachers. So
Mark is here to
uh,
answer that question for
it-
you.
it-
Thank
it's a
goodness you
huge
walked
political
up. I don't do district finance.
Somebody's their
because
senior
of
high
all
school,
the work
they only
that
take
they've
one or
done
two
in the
classes.
last
Yes.
5
If the
sessions
state
or
gave
sessions on ethics.
same
So
amount of
that's a
money
big
that they
deal.
would pay if
The
that's.
second part is the other way that universities often support cooperating teachers is through
yes and no.
free professional development or with vouchers. Again, those cannot be handed directly to the educator, they have to be redistributed
A
through the
minimum
district.
amount.
So the issue that comes up is,
Also, I just invited
sometimes they don't
Andrea,
always end up in the
Andrea is executive
supervision.
director
And the conflict also is that, and I'll just put this out there, is that university professors can write a book and sell it, and actually by statute, keep the proceeds. So without making cooperating
So Mark,
teachers
if
actual
this-
employees of the universities, the Government Ethics Commission's rules.
So
that
if
they
this
can't
were
take
to be
anything of value
investment
for
of this
supervising
group,
cooperative.
talk a little bit from your perspective
about
of
it.
what this would involve.
Okay,
How big is the commitment?
so do you have a recommendation for?
Well, the OEIB could propose, and you know, it does require legislation. And it does, it's going to require, I'm not sure what the outcome is, what the expected change is by allowing that. All right, because I don't think the impact on finding high quality cooperative teachers has a thing to do with how much they're paid. I think it has to do with a system of selecting the best teachers to do the supervising. And then until we get a handle on that, this isn't something you bury your political finger on. That's my personal opinion.
Well, I think you have a lot of experience behind that to tell us that. And I think if we were to go through the filter of all these things, like what impacts, it feels like it's very distant
Right.
from student
Right.
outcomes.
I think so.
So we're just gonna
Right.
kind of,
Because it frequently has to do with what kind of teaching load the person has, whether the district thinks they can handle it, you know.
So-
blah, blah, blah. There's a long laundry that's other than
In
this
some
item.
discussions that I've had with school
so I think it's
districts
one
say
of those
if
things we sort of
suddenly
throw
had
back to all the
seniors
groups
coming
working on
back and
teacher
taking
preparation to
courses,
say,
this would
we wanna
necessitate
know how can we really impact getting
How would you answer that?
new preparing teachers with really great teachers. And I know that we have a study that OEIB is doing, but there's also one that Chalkboard is doing, and perhaps this is one for later in Ben to learn more about. So the forming a task force to identify content for secondary level teachers, I think this one really is about, if I'm, let's say, a social studies teacher, how do I know, how do I ensure that I'm preparing kids for success in their careers and college, besides just teaching online? Do I talk about it? Do I talk about the careers that are there and that kind of thing? I think that's what that's getting at. Again, I don't know what the huge, if there's a huge impact on outcomes at this point.
Like I'm a superintendent also.
Well, I do know that in buildings, often when you try to set up something like an advisory, staff resist it because they perceive that the content is fluff and that it's not directly tied to the student outcome. There is, but then you research and you find it, so I'm not sure if the task force's job will be just collect that.
I think what they wanted to do was to have us figure out how does it get infused into this content classes.
Got it.
So, to
Um,
me, it's a philosophical vision thing.
Feels a little bit still.
So I'm gonna try to help this process along, because we have a long list. So what I'm hearing you say is that perhaps
I
one of
think
the
the
next
problem
steps would
is
be that
that,
OEIB would need to
um,
recommend a
social
group
studies teachers in
comprised
particular can come
probably
through
teachers,
several pathways. They
administrators,
can
and
do history,
supposed
they
to
can do
state departments
political science,
to
they can
actually
do
look
geography.
at
They're
what would
really,
it take
really multiple
to
subjects,
fully
knowledge
offer
people,
students,
right? So
a full
it,
senior year
this
offer.
applies to
What
all
would- what
teachers. They should be
part
able
of-
to
what
make,
should
it's
be
really about
included
making
in
the
that? I've heard
content
some people
relevant.
say
So you
transitional
can't
courses
get that
that
through
would help
measuring the
students avoid
content. You can
remedial
only get that
education,
through the,
college
right? Are you
success
right? I
course.
mean,
um,
so,
internship.
I
Exactly.
it
So
really
that's a
has to
perfect
be
example.
the
You need to
leadership
call
and
it
the
out,
district
right,
and the
once
teacher
it's
working
been
together to
done.
make sure the content's
Okay.
relevant.
If you haven't met
so
Math
that
95,
It
which is
it
algebra
supports those actions.
So if we were to say, where should this occur? Any
standard, like
place in the
it's a
system,
sophomore year
where
class.
should that work be done?
Then you take it your senior year.
Well,
Because
isn't
what's
it embedded
happening
in part
for
of
the average kid
Yeah, I
is,
mean,
that's algebra,
college and
that's
career
algebra
readiness
two,
is
maybe
embedded
a
there,
little
and
bit younger.
so the
Okay.
resources have
You
to
have
go
no math
into
and
help
junior
givers,
senior.
like the article on paper.
Okay.
Then you couple
It has to go into helping the teachers become prepared, right, to deliver the different learning styles that are expected in the common core, which is all part of making it relevant. So it's the age-old question, we're just focused in now on measuring it through these steps.
I think that has very little to do with restructuring.
So,
It has to do with what
the best way to have an impact is making sure that
I'm wanting to
professional
know
development is available for the current workforce and the incoming workforce. All of their content tests, as far as Common Core is developed, are aligned.
So we know they have that content page, but it was the exact same question you asked about the administrators. Putting it into action happens in the classroom.
After high school
Would you
setting.
agree with that?
Yeah. Because I guess I'm
I can't think of it.
Yeah, I know, so I took some notes. So I think the key point you made there is that we believe it's embedded in
I just say
Common
we should
Core,
move those,
and it's
move on from
dependent
this.
on the
It doesn't seem to be
professional
a high,
development
even
and making sure that we invest,
Maybe
that's
some
what we need
policy.
to invest, that
Maybe
we're
some
investing
policy.
Sounds like a
effectively
lot of
there.
policy.
And it's the teaching strategies that make the content
We'll
relevant.
move on,
to the
because we do have a few
Okay.
more under
Just a
this
few more.
green.
Yep, teaching strategies.
So, your next one that was listed within X.
So I guess a question I would put under that one is just checking in with ODE to say, is there more investment that's required to do Common Core state standards?
The secondary level, I think it's what we were just talking about.
I mean.
So this was getting at the fact that you
Right.
have a
So I'm gonna
bundle
put
of
that down
issues
as a
that
question
come up.
too.
Some of this came up through the accelerated learning committee review.
Yeah.
Again,
Superintendent
that
groups.
you have a requirement.
Again, I don't
of
think
an
we're
individual
prepared to
plan
put
and
dollar
profile for
amounts
every
on
student
that or
for
to
every
recommend
curriculum
that, but I do
don't
think we can
we're gonna
recommend.
maximize. We also
I guess
know
what
that
I would
right
say is
now,
that we
not
put a
every
note
student
to
in the state
recommend
has access
that
to some level of
OEIB continues to
support that
check
helps them
in
think about
with
careers.
ODE
And
on
we're
how our
split. A lot of
teachers
places
doing
use
preparing
CIS,
for that.
career information
And
systems.
looking
A lot of
for where does
technology
the
on it.
investment need to
There's
be
been
made
a
in
suggestion,
order
at
to
least by
ensure
one
that.
person, that, maybe we need to say baseline,
We'll,
you're not
we'll
offering
read silently
anything,
the next
to
one.
at least make sure that your kids have access to a career information system, because it's an Oregon-built product, and if they wanna add an ambiance, they can do that, but at least have a baseline. The other thing is that, built on some of the work that we've seen with Eastern Promise, with the infusion of a college success course, that could help students.
So the next one,
think about what
Vicki,
it's
this
like
is
to
really
be
you
college
telling
ready.
us
They
what's
could fill
needed.
out their FAFSA
But
form,
do you
they
need
could
investment?
meet
Do you
with
need
somebody
any
to think
policy?
about their options.
I don't know that we
So
need
we bundled
additional
all of this
policy.
into one
I think
area.
what our
That's one of
next
the
stage right
recommendations
now
that
is
came out
pulling
of
together the stakeholders at the, particularly the higher ed level
Those of
to
you
see
that
how
already
this is
know,
going
what
to
do
be
you think this would
reflected
mean
in our
for
accreditation
investment?
standards. So
But we have to be.
this is beyond embedding, this is making sure that our higher ed faculty in particular are using best practices when it comes to preparing candidates to work with technical standards. I mean, it's very targeted in that regard. So you would want and expect to have the exact same expectation for working with special ed kids, or working with kids of poverty, or working with diverse kids. It's just that this is a piece that has not been embedded into the general
There's no
preparation programs,
incentive.
and that would include administrators as well. So we
Is that-
compare,
It's
the
a
faculty
built-in
know they have
accelerated
to
learning.
compare candidates to work with diverse
And
kids.
Andrea, help me if I'm.
With
Yeah, and this-
targeted
So
enough.
the accelerated learning
If that makes
it says that
It's not
there will be
explicit.
a,
So our point in
process by which the Oregon
getting to
State
these standards was making it explicit because the district was telling us people aren't coming out of it prepared, and our higher ed faculty also have to be prepared. It's a new thing.
how the
So we're saying that what we would do on this one is recommend it to higher education and TSPC to embed it.
Right, to work on how it's gonna be embedded, because, so the short answer would be, we know our next step is to develop the implementation
Like getting the faculty to
and our
engage
ability
with the high school
to,
folks.
to hold programs accountable for how this happens inside the programs. All right, that would be our first step. Rolling it out into the workforce, there's two choices. We can put it all in the district's lap, or you could say that, a very unpopular route but effective is to mandate a certain
More critical to stop this
state.
now
All
than the
professional
master's
development
degree.
will have this.
I really do,
If
as
that
I'm
makes
watching
sense.
this play
That's a
out, this is
very
the most
effective
critical
way.
thing.
Of course, you always battle the, if you tell me I have to do it, that's part of being invested. So I don't know how we round up the other end. We can take care of the resources. It's the existing workforce that I think we need to work on. And that does require investment.
We wrap up our program.
Investment.
I don't have stipends for.
I wonder if this is one we send to an organization like OEIB. So just to throw out an example, in my district, we're having the same conversation about equity and issues for and it's embedded instead of just these separate dialogues. And we are working on a strategy where we will require every professional development to begin with disaggregated data showing achievement gap or disproportionality and an equity question, which might have a piece of reading or text or video or something to show, make a point, and have it start with that kind of dialogue before you jump into what is the content. So if it's around math or language arts or whatever it was. And I could see that this would be that kind of thing that we could work with OLN on. Again, I don't think.
So here's where I think we bump into
Because that's a group of the willing, it doesn't address every single district, but it is a group of the willing.
But once we develop models and ways to do it, people usually are more willing, because it's usually,
Demonstrate evidence that they are.
yeah, or even the how. Because a lot of us agree we need to do these things, but how do we do it? Someone's got to figure that out. And OLN right now is taking on disproportionality and restorative justice and how might we do that around that. I think this is another topic where we could encourage that support for districts.
Let's word that and get that added in here now.
And I think also OEIB, which we already had here.
And ODE could model it, they do a lot of professional development, so even if they had a template for how the professional developers approach lesson planning for professional development. Because what I saw in what you did was
I want you to first, I want you first to look at everything on here
Yeah.
that you already have looked at. And
So
then
right
come
now,
back
the
and say,
thing that's gaining ground
this is what we
around
want to put on the
specifically
list.
the
If you're
ELL
adding new
piece
things
is
in,
the,
just make sure you look at everything else
what's
that
called
previously
constructing
was.
meaning. So it's sort of
And then I'm fine.
beyond the PSYOP stuff, it's not
got
just
5 more
good teaching
investments
strategies, but it's really specifically
11 to 14,
strategies
yeah.
to bridge
I
the
really
two
think
languages
accelerated learning
for
can be
content
discussed.
teachers. So
Warrant the OEIB.
there are districts that
And
are
then
doing
decide,
that, and
yeah, then
some
decide
that
which subcommittee,
require that of all
if
their
appropriate,
teachers,
takes
so
what
we
parts
have
on.
that piece because.
I
Is that done in both
Sure,
languages
yeah,
when
we
the
do.
construction happens?
So I would
Languages.
I don't think it's done in two languages because this is for all teachers who might not have the other language. It's just how to make the language part explicit. It's a little bit similar to the conversation we had about teaching the reading skills that you
So
need
that's
for
like a summer
science or for
bridge.
social studies when we used
So
to
we're not
say,
losing people
well, content
about
teachers and science and social studies don't want us to be reading teachers.
College.
No, but there's
This
certain
one's
reading and writing skills they
probably
need for that.
Content generated.
You do the same
So it's
thing with the
academic
language.
and the
That's a good thing.
Right, it's bridging that academic and being explicit. There's specific strategies.
It's actually
that are
a
taught.
little bit different than that. It can
I'm gonna write that down for constructing
And
meaning.
what we are also in kind of a line.
And it's a very specific training, and if you do it right with coaches and that kind of thing, where they're going in the classroom. So that could be something parallel to what's being offered in
It's going to be
higher ed.
pushing a lot of things around
And I wonder with the network,
But
the
this
major
also
investments
picks
that
up
we
those
have in
kids
this
that
thing.
actually did their FAFSA, they graduated from high school, they got accepted,
good point.
and then they don't
Let's
show
put
up
that
to
down.
do it.
It's
And so
something
some
to
places
bring
in
to
other
the
cities
network.
have funded
That meeting is
a
tomorrow.
guidance
Bring
counselor,
that.
some of the things is responsible for touching base with
So
the seniors
rather than
that are
investing
in that
in
situation,
a new
and
way,
making sure
maybe
that
this
they
just
actually
becomes
make it
part
to
of
that
the
next step.
focus of our network.
Senior year, nobody seems to have a responsibility. So, but it's a relatively low yield for a kid.
So the next one, you might know more with that one, benefits of educator preparation programs for national readiness districts. That should be the
Well, that stands for the Council for the Accreditation and Educator Preparation, which is the new organization for national accreditation that combines the two other ones. So right now, I haven't been engaged in any of these conversations, but I would tell you, other than in my work, this can be postponed, I think it should continue to be looked at, and I will tell you why, because the standards on paper still being developed. And so maybe it's really too early to take a stand and say, unequivocally, all the programs in Oregon have to be nationally accredited.
Okay.
So right now it's voluntary, and we have
Okay.
like 8 of our 18 are nationally accredited.
I'd say, but I'd say.
But there are things that
I
go
think,
along.
I mean,
There are
obviously
ways
the
that the
dual credit,
state
accelerated
can
learning report is
ensure that we have standards that parallel, meet, or
It's a
exceed
lot of
the kind of
it's,
standard for the national standard. Because,
developing design
it's an
post-secondary
extraordinarily
remediation
expensive
courses that engage and
process.
accelerate the attainment of
It's
necessary
like over
CCR
$100,000 for an institution to support a national standard.
So this is the one that's
Everybody's
placeholder
resource strapped.
for the
What
recommendations that
we
are
have
coming
done in
out
our shop
Friday.
is we've tried to make sure that whether
And
they're
you're
nationally
very aware
accredited
of
or
that
not,
work.
very similar or substantially.
We saw a draft of it in this work.
Standards. So,
Elizabeth,
standards
in
are
our
still being
group, you're right,
developed.
She gave us
I think
a,
it's
she gave us
worthwhile
a hint
and
of what was to come
thumbnail
now.
was quite, there are states that have standards about all their
And this
programs
is one
being
of our
nationally
data.
accredited. But we have no data, and we won't have data for several years that the new standards are even going to make a difference. And I'm not being critical, but it says anything but, it's like national boards. We had no data on national boards in the last, even after 10 years. So, but that doesn't mean that we don't have an idea of what we think makes sense. So I would just say,
So I think what you're saying is the recommendation is let more work be done. Let's find out the evidence. It is very expensive, so investing our very precious dollars right now. And I think we'd also say is it's not real close to student outcomes at this
So,
point.
a couple of
Given
questions
that
here.
you don't even
I
have
just
the
thought this would be something that will be on
right, I don't think
CCWP's
the case can be
recommended strategic investments.
Yes.
And from OCC.
So the next one's
as well.
require the teacher
And
can.
so us buttressing that would be our third voice in saying that's important.
So I think this is
that's
a,
probably,
this is aligning our,
capital TASC. Yeah. So it's I little n,
Okay.
interstate, task force.
so is there any work happening right now around aligning any evaluation for the teacher candidates? Is there coming out?
Yes, the new adoption of the
So I'm
scale
putting down that
and
it's a high
the
support
Stanford
in this
performance
group,
assessment
that we are also waiting, kind of a holding pattern,
is
waiting for the
100%
final
aligned with
recommendations
this
from the
task.
development of that group.
We've
And as
adopted
soon as those are
these
made public, ours and
programs have to show
send
them.
out.
Yeah, and then we should have a discussion
I
around
didn't ask
that.
you.
Performance assessment that we adopted aligned.
Yeah,
with
right,
that.
so they,
So I don't
she
think
will be
there's
there, but we
any
need to
other
make some of this a
proactive
little
steps that
earlier.
need to be taken.
Okay.
So you'll get the report, and then you'll have Elizabeth on the agenda.
Well, and by a month from now, we should have taken those recommendations.
Establish and disseminate common
What it will look like, what the investment needs.
Okay, so we're gonna hold a placeholder for this year as a high.
So I think this gets at, are these institutions required?
Well, depending what the,
I have done that somewhere in my life.
We'll need discussion once we see the report, but in this
Just
area.
being truth and honesty here.
From programs, so that
Okay,
students are
what's your next
selecting what.
Recommend that HEC consider ways to
Do I have
support
any
financial
evidence
needs for
that
students
they're
not eligible for Pell
successful?
Grants
Is
or
that
work
so,
study.
is there a hex goal to do that on all
Bailey,
higher ed
completely.
programs that thought? or is
The
it just around-
accountability measures, these are the famous accountability measures, that's actually
Right.
what you
I
call
don't
them.
remember
That's
that.
actually what I put in program accountability measures.
That report they had on financial aid.
But would these be particular to teacher prep?
Oh,
That's
yes.
where these are, yeah.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
would
it's something
be.
they, it's something they could
Right,
still put
these
into
would
it.
be, I
you
mean,
know.
So is
this
it
is an
something you wanna carry
expectation
to
that
act
the
and
university,
say,
for example,
this
is
is
published
something
their
we
top
should
rates
be-
on the content.
But it wouldn't necessarily rise to the top for
know,
strategic investment for this
the
group before.
I think
ability
they
of
should wrap it
candidates
into their
to get
financial
hired
aid
and
report.
hired.
It's interesting, I think I, on tasks, I signed
The
No, I mean,
employer
that's what it says right here
satisfaction.
anyway. Yeah, I
The
think they should be
university's
looking at ways
performance. I
to
mean, there's,
uh,
and I think the
include
thing
it
that we
in their
need
financial
to
aid recommendations.
stay cognizant of, this will be an
Which I think is
expectation
being
of the
forwarded to
national
the
standard.
diploma.
This will also be an expectation of the new federal regulations that are coming out under HEA, particularly.
This is more about tuition equity.
preparation. So this is again a great time to pause and wait to see how these come together before we.
Oh,
Not
but
that
actually, the
legislature
legislation
change
just
our
changed, yeah, they're
It's a
just,
huge
And
hell.
it's an expectation for people.
they're just just has to be a clear understanding that not every student wants to see eligible for special needs.
We're not going to see those
Except that
federal
you
regs until
parents
this
fall
summer.
and say,
Still,
well,
we
every
just know that
student
they're
who's on
going to
IEP
be
have
heavy
their
on the
policy.
accountability
they're still gonna have to
transparency.
meet some criteria.
So they're gonna want a consolidation of the data on
Absolutely.
our website.
And that's what the law
And then they're gonna want to be able to independently.
All right, so
And
that
the
one's
other thing
going
I
to
will
heck.
mention, and I do have a vast.
Identify
record
unique needs and
record. They
supports
also
that
want
will
you
be
to
needed
close
for
the
rural and small
lowest
districts to
ranking
increase
institutions.
post-secondary
They want you to
participation.
develop a ranking system.
So this
But
was
what if
based
your
on the
lowest
fact
rank
that,
is still
the
above
Accelerated
average?
Learning Committee report.
You see,
Shouldn't the
it's just,
criteria
it's
not
just
be
a,
great?
it's just, so
It's
anyway,
very
just
time
putting
intensive
that
and
out.
hasn't been.
You
Is
know-
that same thing with first time? I was gonna
To
say.
actually go through
Well,
and find
I-
out.
You don't use criteria
every
rankings
single
for
small
small.
We really
rural
need
district
to,
and what they're
because if all
offering
your
students
accountability measures
at the
mean
high school
anything,
level.
and I'll
Mark
tell you
probably
what we
has
find
figured
out from
in
the
on
employer
33 high
satisfaction
schools in
survey
his
is
community,
the
but we don't have that yet
deviation
for the rest
from
of
the
the
state.
state. And one of the questions that came up.
Yeah, I mean,
No high level.
yeah,
Equity piece, particularly around rural.
So I'm looking at how many we have left in this area and realizing, no, that I think the best place for us to address these is really just to work with some on prioritizing these. So I think we should bring these back to the committee after holding our work review to say what's in place,
Move forward. And then also
what is like so far beyond that we shouldn't even really be thinking about it right now. And where is the place that you think to leverage this really to do that? We could bring that back next, rather than us just kind of doing a report out right now on
so
these.
we could do a timeline and how these will look.
I think that would be a better use of our time.
Is this the area where the leader preparation,
A lot of these are very, very
some of the
Yes,
stuff that came
yes,
to us?
it is, and so the part, I think our mics are off, the reason we didn't push that any further today is we got a very long piece of feedback from Pat and the organization. He is, I don't know the name of it, that he's the lead of, is already doing a whole bunch of work with higher ed. And right now it's been completely disjointed, but they are agreeing to get together. So I said what I would do is just continue to encourage that coming together and they can come back in the fall because none of them are far along enough. And there's new standards coming out, so they're kind of waiting for the new standards.
Yeah.
So again, let's just wait for all that.
Take out the word rural and small and just say.
I think we should move to the power up, so we just have about 4 minutes left. Minutes maybe. And I want to look to Craig and say, if you, I mean, I kind of wrote 1, 2, 3 numbers while I was listening, knowing you had to do that, but what would you say are the things we ought to do about investment first and then policy out of these 6
We have
areas? Do you guys know?
incentivized community colleges and universities, 11, 14, 5. We need to align the common core.
I think the foundational one is really around connectivity.
That,
Yeah,
right,
without that,
and then
there's
keep
only so much
tuition,
you
you
can
talk
do,
on that
right?
later.
And so I think that's the first, but there's also some, there's some work going on.
That
State
resolves
level,
your rural, that resolves your urban, that
and state
resolves so many
government
things.
level around.
And I
So
think for
so I
one
think
money
one
anyhow,
of the things we need
that's
to do is
heavy
sort of
lift,
get in
those
touch with where that
it
is.
kind of gaps
So
in
I think we stand, one thing I'll share that I
Where we're
wouldn't
trying
have
to
done in a public setting.
So I'm hearing that you kind of want to,
I saw that
maybe
this
collapse
is kind
some
of
of the
interesting.
recommendations that are in
I saw
accelerated learning,
the state
have a
level
placeholder
results.
for this all in one big area. And it runs out those 3
Dan,
different
but one
things.
thing
It makes pleasure kingdom, it makes people focus more.
is teachers feel they're really challenged by these issues.
Oh, good,
So
good.
there's really interesting feedback there.
Leverage it.
Exactly.
All of these issues or the connectivity?
Connectivity specifically. The next priority for me, just,
Wait, before you go on, could I ask one question, because maybe this is kind of like just looking at it somewhere else, but it feels like this is just not just a federal problem.
No, it's bigger,
Dealing with
definitely.
broadband should be legislature and governor, but it's not out of the OEIB investment. So it's like, that might be number 1, but we're gonna have another number
right,
1
and
that's
I
really
think we're
around
gonna identify
education.
where in state government that have large, it's already deep, but it's also being with them. We can kind of encourage that.
Okay.
But there's communities that come together, you might even do something like local and certainly not just education.
Yeah, so if we had to prioritize, for example, we don't want all the education dollars that might get
Because this is
reinvested to be
heavily
going to that
on paying
versus
the tax.
the things that are education.
So,
Is there tax
an-
base
anecdotally, I don't think we ever anticipated in my agency that we would have the fiber optic needs for speed, based on the amount of data we collected, but our database has so exceeded our capacity to get fiber optic power. We're actually currently looking at doing real kind of construction adjustments to allow for new fiber optic buildings, because as you wait, every time for something to power up, you're wasting time that you can't do somewhere else. And it has to do with, it's like having your first calculator. You remember, you never knew when you were going to
Take that process.
So I know this is probably what's going on. It was impossible for us to anticipate we would need all these huge buildings with large amounts of data.
Last one then?
Just anecdotally.
Develop
It's
bridge
a big
programs
program.
that provide support for students no longer qualifying for federal programs to read over on campus, etc.
This goes back to your
Next, I
early
would kind of group
concept
some of these
where
things
you
together.
were focused on, particularly in this case,
That
with
we
PLR,
can go a long way
some
with
folks
some
from
of the collaborative
community college
and
come out
kinds
and
of
talk
approaches
about the
that
fact
we
that
take here.
sometimes the
You can
supports
look
drop off for
at,
students if they don't
number
qualify.
3, in terms of the
or
textbook
trio
adoption side,
or-
so I can start to think differently about that. ODB has begun to do that, but I think we can have a real broad effort around that. Same in terms of developing digital content. I think that's something that we have to come together to try to figure out and to begin to do together. And along those lines, and this is probably where the real dollars are in this area. We've got to begin to develop, provide for
How about I put down the building needs to go from here?
because
Let me grab that financial aid.
5 years from now,
Just over my
kids are
state,
going to come equipped.
pages said there,
In many cases, what we have to do is sort of build on it.
We're dying to see the development.
Know that we'll be in a place where we have.
It's not necessarily
digital devices. I think it's more like
Or
make sure.
you don't abandon it completely, there's other
And that's a
options.
different.
Could be policy, could
So
be
to me, the key is
tasks.
around
I'm
that's
sure
part of it.
all of the agencies
I
are
think we
just
have to come
quivering to
together.
be excited about more tasks, no funding.
See, that's my point.
Yeah, it's like if our funding is going to be really.
I was sitting next to Carla during the presentation, and the lack of staffing at OEIB means that we didn't.
The accelerated learning community
So Carla
report
talked about
definitely
the fact that
includes
there
CTE
are
right in there, so the
states
funding
that
mechanism.
have entered into
Very
agreements open, she mentioned a number of them, she was whispering, so she wouldn't be too overheard, I want to follow up with her. But there are states that leverage 1 or 2 employees.
So that's one of the
in her level
recommendations from
and
the
get a lot of
state.
value back by working with each other. This idea around textbook and curation of data, no offense, but that's a nationwide thing, not an Oregon thing.
Remedial need
And
and get the students
I
on
was
the
really
path.
struck by that staffing issue. So in terms of an OEIB thing, when I look at the investment questions, I think they should be looking at their internal resource out. I mean, that's what their CIO did. If you were gonna add a couple of new positions, what would you not do? And I think, I don't know what our role is as though at OEIB, but it's to encourage, direct, strongly suggest that OEIB would do some prioritization to provide some. To work with, you guys have come up with these ideas.
Finger pointed
Who's
back
gonna go
and forth,
to?
that's open and stuff. The reality is, we gotta take care of business. Kids need to be taken a lot more math.
Yes.
But the agreement then is when they meet the standard, if they don't
And
come to
I think
standard,
even the devices issue you
But
can plan,
the
so I think
CTE
about if you have people
fascinates me
here
because it's not
adequately
even
staffed
math 95
to
requirements, right?
form
Even
collaboratives and
Why
work
should
through all
we
of
take
this,
a
and
class
if
and
you
pay
were
for
to
that?
look
That's
at key
a-
investment strategies,
Especially
where we said, like, I keep
That the
saying,
box should
if I could
check
find a
your
pot of dollars, like from Intel or somebody to say,
The only
will you
thing we
just
have to be
invest in my
cautious
poorest
of.
kids?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll do
You
BYOD,
know, do with everybody else.
and we'll buy devices to put in the library and say, you can check it out for the whole
And
year.
we have to be thoughtful of
It's not gonna
track
cost
kids
kids.
and put kids in.
Because even some
track,
of my
and
poorest
then-
kids are coming
Then
with
they
devices,
find out,
right?
oh, I want to do some other
Because they're
things that
getting
don't
cheaper and
and then
cheaper, they're
going to
finding ways to do that and
told that
so
they
on.
need to take
And
additional
eventually,
classes.
they
So we
will
just have to
figure
be
it
very
out, but for
transparent
right
about
now,
that
let's
and avoid
invest
anything
in
that
for us.
smacks of track.
So if we
Yeah,
had a
this is a
strategy,
conversation.
remember we get dollars in the strings attached?
Yes.
I think the high school people.
So how do you
they
provide
have to
these
get that.
resources
But
to your
colleges need to
biggest
own
need
why they're
buildings, for example?
creating
Right now, I'm
these
looking at my
classes
high school
in the
and going,
first place.
If I could put 200 devices in the library,
us
three
to pay
Chromebooks,
already
$200 each,
and not take
for
it
them to
kindergarten.
check out. And I
At some
probably could figure it out
point, you take
myself.
the kid.
But if we have a strategy
put
where
them
we
in a class
encourage
that
people to look
matters,
at the
at
poorest
some
kids
point,
first,
You quit
and
saying
provide
he's not
device
ready.
instead of trying to look at providing
You
for
put him in
everyone.
a class, you don't even offer.
So if I were to restate what I think we're saying in priorities, number one is a big priority, but the whole state needs to figure it out.
Yeah,
For OEIB, we're saying let's push on ODE or help support ODE to say, look at your positions different, but you need to resource this with several staff members to own all of these parts of this plan. That's exactly what we do with ELL, and that's how we're getting it
And
done.
then the funding is built around, right? It's
Right.
Office.
Right.
The one
And
thing
then the
I-
third one is this, in some way, there needs to be a funding initiative that's around deployment of devices in some way.
And I'd really like to focus on
Okay, I'm gonna go
kids who
along with
really
the
poorest.
Right. We're seeing in Eugene, because we're doing wonderful,
Yes.
the schools that you know well, and where it's making the biggest impact is in the highest poverty schools. It's not a big surprise, but we're getting really solid data that that's true.
For what part?
And the higher SES schools
It's like
probably
a-
do not make as much of a difference because there's all the things that.
How are you collecting that data? Because that would be a key piece to tie to that, to say we would do a pilot statewide.
Right. We're just keeping track of which kids got the intervention, and we're looking at OAPS, CBM, grades, discipline, and attendance, and then some interviews of kids. That's at Howard, we did North Region,
And are you doing a
Sheldon
specific
Region.
intervention, or just that they have?
Yes. Well, we looked at Project Red, which really directed specific high-level strategies. So it's a specific amount of content instruction that's delivered on the device. All interventions have to be delivered with an app or connected to it. And then there's very particular staff development that all teachers get in all of the schools. But we're seeing that the traction that this is happening in the poorest schools. And, one simple thing here is BYOD is pretty complicated. Portland, Salem, some districts have the IT ability to do BYOD. That's why you have to bring your own device. A lot of smaller districts are not going to be able to, so maybe this is too far in the weeds, but helping some of these pilot districts figure out how to do BYOD might be a really
Over
good
that
thing.
far column, where he
Because
said
they can't
this was
hire
directed.
the IT
If we want them to do
people
something
to
like
do
study
it in a
this,
secure
bring back
way.
data,
So it's even Eugene
help
struggles.
me know whether or not we
Well,
want
in our
to keep the
district, we
language
decided
very
if we
clear
could
on
do
what
that,
tasks
we
we
could recommend a device. At first, we were thinking iPads, but they were sort of spending. Now with Chromebooks, we're piloting the
Yeah.
Chromebook right now to see, that would probably be the one that we'd recommend, right?
Yeah.
Because it's
$200.
inexpensive, they get, I mean, so we're trying to see that. But again, I think that having staffing at ODE and building
So I'm gonna give you
in,
an
that was one thing I
example.
was wondering if we're missing
On
on
one
this
of these here,
strategic
here's
plan. Can we
language
put that in
letters.
the ELL, is that there is some site of, some committee that's gonna have
And this
oversight.
brings in the parents piece as well.
We put that in the
That
ELL.
I think it might be in some of the detail there a
Clearer
little bit,
language, or
And it could
clearer
be
data.
also an ODE or however we wanna do that, but,
And getting that into the hands of.
that would be where you can kind
And
of figure out what the organization
so
is.
right now I have
So,
that on the list as something.
For your
that the
research
equity
priorities,
office
you
or the
support
ELL
funding
folks should
initiatives
focus on.
about device access in relation to funding and staffing at ODE, but you haven't, was it professional development?
It was the staffing of ODE, well, it was the first one, really saying that statewide, they've gotta work on this broadband issue, that was the first.
Oh, the first one, okay.
Can I mention something about number one?
Sure.
When we did this in Eugene, we talked about a broadband plan. One thing that we hear from all the partners of schools is, you guys have Wi-Fi, can you leave it turned on and leave it open for the community so you can be part of
And
the
you're talking
solution? So
specifically CL
let's have our city
No,
be a
like
Wi-Fi
it's-
city, but schools need to play a part and be open long.
Oh,
and
Yeah.
train our
I'm
parents
gonna
and
suggest
schools
that's
do
probably
have a
not
part
gonna
to play, not laying the wires and
But I
spending
think
billions
it's
of
worth
dollars,
hanging on
but being
to.
part of that
What
solution.
is a concern there is that
And
sometimes
we've done that in our district,
Yeah.
just so.
post-secondary institutions don't know.
Like our high school's open till 10 o'clock at night anyway, just get done in the cafeteria.
And so we're actually suggesting to OEIB that the Everett EL status that they is now adding on.
So I think we're sort of making an assumption with
So you would at least know
prioritizing
where
staff
the
into
students are.
OEIB, that
And maybe be able to.
we're expecting that all of these are gonna kind of get done. Coordination
And that's a
around
task
digital
necessary, possible.
materials, coordination around
You heard
definitely
from
the
parents
professional
who
development.
were concerned about not knowing
And
enough about.
even recommendation about BYOD and how devices would be used, but that other third one is dollars for devices tied to some kind of plan, accountability. Definitely need,
Early K-12 and post-secondary.
so you guys can tell me what you got, it's going to
Be able to help.
detailed, organized like that.
It's really good.
It's way more bigger picture.
And
See, adoption supplement statute. That's a stupid question, because that statute.
Yeah, it
is
is,
an
because
administrative role.
I think it's in
Yeah.
statute because we have to turn in a form that, yeah, and what we found out is they got.
Well, it seems related to some of the data.
Then nobody can take the
Well, and then what do they do to us, slap us on the
Right.
hand?
Right.
In California, they have
I mean,
the
it's-
requirement,
that
but
would
you
cost
also,
money,
they
but are we not
require you
talking
to
about
spend a
is
certain
data
amount of
because
your
it's strategic
resource on keeping textbooks up to date. So it can't be lost in pull up payment in store,
Right.
you know, which is where
Health
it usually
insurance.
goes.
Right.
All right, I think we did all of ours.
No.
Hilda, how are you all doing?
We're just about done.
Okay, I think we are done.
We've gone
At least
through
with what
once.
we're gonna do.
Well, I think
Here's,
is
are we
there
really
something
doing
under
it?
11
All
through
work?
14 that doesn't fall under
Is OEIB started at
reports
one or
advanced
two?
placement or doesn't fall
So
under
I'm-
developmental ed?
So we'll just.
I'm gonna send these to you, so while it's fresh in your head, you can
Okay.
make an adjustment.
Okay, would you mind
Is there
also,
anything we'll overlook?
just reporting out? I think about the one, all of you should say about the teacher prep.
The alignment of
One is that we're going to,
Okay, all right.
not to teacher quality.
Never sat up there before.
So we've got two funding
We
priorities.
And that's why our conversation.
You know,
So
actually,
it's,
yeah. We had a good report on
Actually,
that. Conference and winning the faculty and administrators.
That was the comment.
No.
Well, I think what we want to say is invest in measures that allow us to
Common
make both
course.
Spanish and
And
English.
here's
just
the
We think it's
I'm
easy.
sorry, it's just, gotta get through the filter here. Common course, yeah, I mean, maybe that should be on here, I would think, in the 11 reports. Because I have a feeling that report's just withering away with nobody funding that.
Well, they can-
That's a good job.
Somebody should be taking the
Okay.
head from this board, I don't know who the,
All right, so
I
I'm
don't
gonna
know
put
who
it
the appropriate
down.
person that would be, but. Well, and going, yeah, well, let's put it on there, and.
I am.
It carries more weight when that, so it's the force, the OEIB, and the governor behind it.
Force alignment, and that's happening. And they have to have those folks.
And also, the other thing I'm bringing to heck about financial aid to students in this report, the heck approved committee OEIB, and the final part that calls next steps, calls for the work group, recommends that the following issues be taken up. Explore possible approach to identify, incentivize, and support undocumented immigrants who are eligible for tuition.
Well, there you go. Good.
So it is being.
That's good news.
Send me a reminder email anyway, and I'll make sure.
Yeah, I have it down.
That I talked to, Larry Roper was the chair of that
Yep.
report, and make sure that's in the
Okay,
jargon.
thank you. You jumped in and just, without even having that previous conversation, that was really good.
I think it's part of getting the staffing.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you need any work on us?
I think we're okay.
Do you need us to?
Are we gonna
Yeah.
debrief?
We're gonna come back up.
Okay, come back up for 2 minutes.
Thanks. 2 minutes?
So we can have a lunch break real quick.
No, there was no public.
Seth, you want to turn the mics back on, and while everybody's coming up, I will talk, so when you sit down, we're ready to move forward.
They love it. They love the time to be alone.
How are you?
Really like that. Kathleen, sir.
This is the 2-minute update.
Well, that's what I was just going to suggest, that rather than a report out, you and I organize all of this, do
And
a
then have a
phone
It
conference.
has to be open to the public.
Right, but in June, we're coming back together again, right? All right. So looking at the time, rather than having us do a report out, what I'm going to recommend is that Hilda and I will work on, because we know we trust the experts that we're working on the two groups, to put all of the recommendations together, and then we will probably need to schedule a time to do a phone conference to do the final prioritization before our June 10th meeting, because on June 10th of OEIB, we have to have these ready to present to OEIB.
Particularly the tasks and the policies.
Right.
And we should know what we're moving forward as a strategic investment, even though we're not presenting that to the OEIB in the June meeting. Is that kind of clear?
Yep. So on June 10th, we will then publicly share that information and do any other tweaks that we might need to do, but we'll take care of it through a phone call. July 24th is when we will present to Outcomes and Investments the areas that we think need to have investment around them. There's no meeting in July, and we do have a full-day retreat August 12th for OEIB, but not this committee. So will we schedule another committee meeting in August? No.
No, it'll be a full-day retreat for the OEIB board.
Okay, so our last meeting then for the school year is on June 10th. and that's
But
to
one of the
finalize
things
these.
that I think we'll be needing to do is to take the strategic investments, and I have to really work with Chair Curtis to write up answers to all these questions that I pointed out to you. So you're going to need to want to read that
Yeah.
before it becomes final. So we'll try to get that to you a week before the June meeting, so that you have time, and then you can give feedback, and we'll clean that up, and then it has to be ready to go to the outcomes group.
So the phone call to agree on priorities will be before that or after that?
It'll be before
Whenever.
the June meeting, because then we'll need to write all of this up.
Okay, so that's a week before then. All right, that's what we'll try for. Any other closing comments?
There is no public testimony.
Okay. And we have half an hour on OEIB, so let's get lunch.